LoveLore Library. Chapter 158. Zhang Xiaohu saw that Zhang Xiaohua was worried and smiled at He Tianshu. This disciple has just joined the school and doesn't know much about the sect. Would martial uncle he please explain? He Tianshu thought for a moment and said to Zhang Xiaohua, "This is some common knowledge in the Jianghu. There's no harm in telling you. Our Misty School's normal disciples are divided into two types, commoner disciples and brocade disciples." When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she couldn't help but interrupt, "That's not fair, Captain He. Why does the Misty School discriminate? If you have money, you can become a brocade disciple, but if you don't, you can only be a commoner disciple." He Tianshu glared at him in annoyance and said, "Can you let me finish? Don't you know that it's very impolite to interrupt others?" Li Jinfeng looked at Zhang Xiaohua with a smile. After all, when they were young, with his second brother and He Tianshu, who was like a master, Zhang Xiaohua's youthful habits were fully displayed. Zhang Xiaohua stuck out her tongue and didn't dare to say anything else. He Tianshu continued, "The difference between commoner disciples and brocade disciples isn't whether or not they have money. The disciples of the Misty School are all taken in at the age of 4 or 5. There are specialized people to train them. They don't do business and don't have parents, so where would they get the money? The fundamental difference is in their martial arts cultivation and their contributions to the Misty School. All disciples start off as commoner disciples. Commoner disciples are divided into 10 ranks, and each rank has its own content to cultivate, including fist techniques, sword techniques, palm techniques, and inner force cultivation methods. Commoner disciples are not allowed to skip ranks to cultivate other cultivation methods. Once they have finished cultivating the cultivation methods of their rank, they can proceed to the next rank after being tested by a specialist. In fact, many inner force cultivation methods, palm techniques, and sword techniques are also divided into levels. Commoner disciples also have a corresponding level of cultivation methods for each rank. Only when they advance to the next rank can they have the opportunity to cultivate the lower level of cultivation methods. Zhang Xiaohua found it strange and asked, "Captain He, what does this have to do with the martial arts exhibition?" Just as he finished asking, he seemed to have understood something and muttered to himself, "Could it be that this martial arts exhibition is the test you were talking about?" He Tianshu's face was filled with joy as he said, "Zhang Xiaohua's brain is still very bright. You guessed right, this martial arts exhibition is a test for the disciples' advancement. It's held once a year." Zhang Xiaohua said proudly, "In that case, does this disciple also advance once a year?" He Tianshu smiled and said, "You're right. Those who can enter our Misty School are all talented people. Coupled with the fact that the school teaches students according to their aptitude, most of the disciples can advance once a year." Li Jinfeng suddenly understood and laughed loudly, "Captain He, this sounds like the students in our school who have to take an exam every year. If they pass the exam, they can go to a higher place to study." He Tianshu was stunned and said, "I think it's about the same. After all, the essence of practicing martial arts and studying literature is to improve. If you want to improve, there must be a test standard. Although the standards are different, the essence is the same." At this time, Zhang Xiaohu opened his mouth and asked, "Martial Uncle He, you were talking about commoner disciples just now. What about brocade disciples?" He Tianshu took a sip of tea and continued, "If a commoner disciple learns all 10 levels and passes the test, they can become a brocade disciple. The brocade disciple is divided into 5 levels and is also tested in the martial arts exhibition every year. However, the brocade disciple's cultivation is different from the commoner disciples. Every level of the commoner disciple's cultivation is the same, while the brocade disciple's cultivation is taught different cultivation techniques according to their aptitude. For example, if Zhang Xiaohu were to advance to the brocade disciple's level, he would have a unique interest or insight in fist techniques and may cultivate the ethereal sect's high-level fist techniques. Li Jinfeng nodded and said, the ancient said that there is no limit to learning, but there is a limit to life. Only those who specialize in what they learn can have impressive achievements. The embroidered gown disciples of your esteemed sect probably specialize in one skill based on their own strengths. He Tianshu smiled and said, it's better to study literature. When you open your mouth, you speak in a literary style and make sense. Perhaps this is the reason why the predecessors of my sect set these rules. However, there are still some differences between the examinations of the brocade disciples and the commoner disciples. Although the commoner disciples are tested through a martial arts competition, the winner will undoubtedly be promoted. However, if the loser has enough power and obtains the approval of the judge, they can also be promoted. Brocade disciples are the opposite. The standards are stricter. Even if they win the martial arts test, if they don't receive the judge's approval, they can't advance. Then, he said with a strange tone, also, there is no limit to the number of times a brocade disciple can take the test. As long as you don't pass the test, you have to keep taking the test until you pass. If you can't pass the test, you can't advance, no matter how many years you cultivate. At this time, He Tianshu felt that Zhang Xiaohua was staring at him. He asked curiously, Zhang Xiaohua, why are you looking at me? Is there something on my face? Zhang Xiaohua giggled and said, I want to know what rank captain he is now. He Tianshu raised his eyebrows and said with a serious face, well, Zhang Xiaohua, what I just told you is common knowledge in the Misty School. Many people in the martial arts world know about it, so it's fine to say it. As for what rank I am, it involves the secrets of the Misty School. I can't casually reveal it to you. Don't ask too much about it, it's not good for your reputation. When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, her heart skipped a beat. She didn't know much about the Misty School. She quickly said, okay, I understand. Captain He, please continue. He Tianshu said, it's good that you understand. However, there's nothing else to say. Li Jinfeng asked, then, Captain He, can you tell us how to differentiate commoner disciples and brocade disciples? I seem to have heard that the gangs in the martial arts world use the color of their clothes to differentiate their status. They also use things like cuff logos to indicate their rank. When He Tianshu heard this, he snorted and said, this method is extremely crude. I think the Misty School did this a long time ago, but it was abolished later. Zhang Xiaohua's curiosity was piqued. She quickly asked, why is that? Isn't this pretty good? He Tianshu said, first of all, think about it. The Misty School is such a big gang. How many disciples do we have, and what are their ranks? If every rank has to be marked with a different color of clothes, wouldn't the entire gang be colorful? What kind of prestigious sect is this? It's more like the pear garden. Moreover, if the cuff logos are marked, wouldn't it be special? This is too different from the standardization that the Misty School advocates. Actually, there's another point. He Tianshu pretended to be mysterious and said in a low voice, in my opinion, if every piece of clothing is marked, the cost is too high. Although the gang is rich, many times, the landlord doesn't have any extra money. It's better to spend according to one's income. Martial power and financial resources are the two main factors for a gang's development. We can't waste money on trivial matters, right? When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she felt a little sympathetic. She clapped her hands and said, Captain He, I agree with you. Money should be used where it's needed. The other two also understood. However, He Tianshu continued, moreover, if a person's strength can be seen from their clothes, then in the eyes of the Misty School, there will be a clear difference in status. It's not conducive to harmony and unity. It's also very easy to form small groups, which is not conducive to the competition and development of the disciples. The most important thing is, think about it. For the enemies of the Misty School, if they can see your strength from your clothes, then why would they spend so much effort looking for information? If you wear different clothes and have different logos on your clothes, then they can tell what your cultivation level is and how strong you are. They will naturally send people stronger than you to cause trouble for you. Won't you always be under their control, without any privacy? Everyone listened and nodded. He Tianshu said proudly, therefore, the ancestors of the Misty School were very wise to abolish this bad habit of clothing. Ordinary disciples' clothes are more or less the same. Zhang Xiaohua asked again, then, Captain He, when is this year's martial arts exhibition? He Tianshu said, probably a month later. This is a grand occasion for our Misty School. I'm really looking forward to it. Zhang Xiaohua took the opportunity to ask, Captain He, are you ready? He Tianshu smiled proudly and said, I wasn't confident at first, but I just learned ethereal steps. I have. Then, he realized something and said, this is a secret of the Misty School. It's not good to ask too much. Zhang Xiaohua smiled embarrassedly and said, then, when the time comes, can I come and take a look? He Tianshu smiled and said, Huanxi Villa is a branch of the Misty School. Usually, you can enter the Misty School with the villa's token. The security will be tight, but you should be able to enter. When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she was very happy and asked again, then, can I participate in this martial arts exhibition? He Tianshu frowned and said, this martial arts exhibition is specially used to test the disciples of our Misty School. What are you doing? Oh, right, I heard that there were people from Huanxi Villa and Lotus Flower Escort Agency participating. It's been a long time, and I was still young at that time, so I vaguely remember it. However, there are no outsiders participating now. Zhang Xiaohua asked curiously, why is that? Then how can I participate? He Tianshu smiled and said, how would I know? If you want to participate, you can go back and ask Villa Lord O. Zhang Xiaohua asked with concern, Xiaohua, do you really want to participate? Do you only know that fish technique? You've never practiced internal energy. Zhang Xiaohua looked at her second brother and comforted him with a smile, second brother, I'm just saying. I'm just here to watch the fun. Besides, my fish technique is not bad. Last time, I even taught a group of street ruffians a lesson. Everyone smiled bitterly. The newborn calf was not afraid of the tiger. This Zhang Xiaohua really didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. However, if he didn't have this spirit, could he still be called a young man? Even if he was a young man from the countryside. The three of them chatted with Zhang Xiaohua for a while before they bid farewell and left. Zhang Xiaohua carefully hid the Reckless Bull Force manual in her bosom. Only then did she bid farewell to her second brother, who was still looking at her reluctantly when he walked her to the door. Naturally, Zhang Xiaohua used the method in the Heart Sutra to sense the yuan qi of the world outside. In the beginning, he didn't feel anything, but Zhang Xiaohua wasn't discouraged. Or it could be said that he didn't feel any joy or sorrow. His mind was calm and he didn't feel discouraged. He only knew that the outside world was endless emptiness. Only by searching endlessly could there be a result. After an unknown amount of time, Zhang Xiaohua suddenly sensed a trace of the yuan qi of the world that was similar to what was described in the Heart Sutra. He was delighted and was about to use his Heart Sutra to absorb it, but because his mind was distracted, he couldn't sense it anymore. Zhang Xiaohua opened his eyes, but there was a smile on his face. Even though he failed to absorb it for the first time, to Zhang Xiaohua who hadn't sensed the yuan qi of the world, it was a huge improvement. A milestone in progress. He, Zhang Xiaohua, finally had a sense of qi. Zhang Xiaohua was about to circulate his energy again, but when he saw the color of the sky, he couldn't help but be shocked. "Oh!" He immediately jumped up from the ground. Noon had already passed, but he didn't know that there was still lunch to eat. Not long after, Zhang Xiaohua slowly walked back with a few buns in his hand and a bun in his mouth. Zhang Xiaohua's meal was still the same as before. He didn't have someone to send him off like Elder Yu, so naturally, no one would wait for him. That table of first-class food also turned cold and was taken away under the gazes of Ma Jing and the others. Waiting for Zhang Xiaohua were only a few cold buns. When Zhang Xiaohua found out that Nia Xiao and the others hadn't gone to eat, he couldn't help but be shocked. If he had gone earlier, wouldn't he have enjoyed an entire table of delicious food by himself? Zhang Xiaohua, who was currently filling his stomach, still hadn't forgotten the feeling he had just experienced. Chapter 159. After sensing his body for a while, Zhang Xiaohua could not help but want to cry. How could he bully people like this? It was fine if his aptitude was poor, but he could not sense the endless heaven and earth yuan qi in the world like what was mentioned in the Carefree Heart Sutra. He had worked so hard for such a long time and finally managed to draw the yuan qi into his body today. How could this trace of yuan qi suddenly disappear? It was a pity that Zhang Xiaohua did not have another pair of eyes in his body, so he naturally could not search for it. The only thing he could do was try again. With his first success, he could be considered to have accumulated experience. In the future, he would be familiar with sensing the yuan qi. Not long after, Zhang Xiaohua found another trace of yuan qi. It also came down, and with a pull from Zhang Xiaohua, it changed sides and fell into the embrace of Zhang Xiaohua. However, this door was as deep as the sea. After entering Zhang Xiaohua's body, it disappeared without a trace. After doing this a few times, Zhang Xiaohua no longer felt resentful. The heaven and earth yuan qi was outside his body and not his. As long as he drew the yuan qi into his body, then it was surnamed Zhang. Who cared where it was? As long as it did not run out, there would be a day when he would discover it. Moreover, the Carefree Heart Sutra did not mention how yuan qi came out. Looking at He Tianshu and the rest's cultivation, he had never heard of inner strength running out on its own. Could it be that it would be released by him? Speaking of which, it was strange. Zhang Xiaohua just sat cross-legged on the ridge of the medicinal field and drew a lot of heaven and earth yuan qi into his body in just one afternoon. At this time, Zhang Xiaohua was also a little puzzled. Although he had just started drawing yuan qi into his body, he could still draw yuan qi, right? Why couldn't he sense the yuan qi that filled the world? Why was it all strand by strand? And it all came down from above. It was not as the Carefree Heart Sutra said, that it was scattered between heaven and earth. Could it be that He Tianshu and the others' internal energy was cultivated from the outside like this? With a belly full of questions, Zhang Xiaohua returned to the small courtyard. Very naturally, he went to knock on He Tianshu's door. He Tianshu had already returned from the pharmacy and was studying ethereal steps in his room. When he saw Zhang Xiaohua enter the room, he smiled and asked, "Zhang Xiaohua, is there a problem with practicing reckless bull force?" Zhang Xiaohua was stunned and said, "Captain He, you're really a deity. You're really good at divination." He Tianshu waved his hand and said, "It's nothing. Although I was young back then, when I received my first internal energy cultivation method, I was just like you now. I was in a hurry to cultivate and accidentally made a mistake. If it weren't for my senior and junior brothers discovering it early, I would have been crippled. I've heard of your reckless bull force before. It's easy to understand, and the circulation path is simple. It's suitable for people like you who have patience and don't have anyone guiding them." Then, he raised his eyebrows and giggled, "Have you been busy all afternoon? How's your practice of reckless bull force?" Zhang Xiaohua blushed and said in a small voice, "I don't feel anything." I still can't feel the qi. He Tianshu laughed and said, it's okay. The feeling of qi is related to each person's talent. You can't be discouraged and try more. Maybe you'll be able to feel it soon. Back then, I also used 2 whole days to feel the qi. How long does the fastest method take? Zhang Xiaohua was curious. Immediately. He Tianshu answered without hesitation. Ah. Zhang Xiaohua's mouth opened so wide that a duck egg could be stuffed in. That's right. Immediately. He Tianshu smiled and replied, there are countless geniuses in this world. From what I remember back then, very few people can immediately feel the qi. Of course, most people can only feel it after 1 or 2 days. Zhang Xiaohua continued to ask, then, Captain He, is there anyone who can't feel the qi? He Tianshu frowned and said, I don't remember anyone like that. It's still the same old saying. The people that I picked out from Misty School are all talented and intelligent people. Very few of them can feel the qi after 3 or 4 days. Zhang Xiaohua's heart sank. She then asked, then, Captain He, do you feel the qi from the outside world in wisps or lumps? When He Tianshu heard this, he was stunned. He then laughed and said, Zhang Xiaohua, you really know how to joke. There's no real qi in the outside world. The feeling of qi is just a hypothesis. I believe that the reckless bull force also has the meaning of a hypothesis. Pretend that there's qi flowing into your body from your forehead. That's the embryonic form of internal strength. Internal strength, you have to move the qi yourself to open up the acupuncture points in your body and circulate it in your meridians. Every time it circulates, it will increase a little. This is the essence of increasing internal strength. Of course, there are also some medicine that can increase internal strength. But I've never heard of being able to absorb qi from outside the body. If that's the case, we can just absorb qi from outside the body every day. Why do we have to sit cross-legged and cultivate our internal strength? When he saw Zhang Xiaohua's puzzled face, He Tianshu explained, also, the meridians in the human body are the containers for internal strength. The size of the container determines the amount of internal strength. We cultivate internal strength for 2 reasons. On one hand, we need to increase our internal strength. On the other hand, we need to expand our meridians. Only when both are increased can it be considered a high-level internal strength cultivation method. Although your reckless bull force is easy to learn, the circulation path is very simple. Every time you circulate it, the increase in your internal strength is limited. Also, this cultivation method has very little effect on expanding your meridians. That's why there are very few people who suffer from qi deviation. But Zhang Xiaohua was a little anxious and said, I can't feel internal strength from outside the body. Then how can I generate internal strength in my body? He Tianshu smiled and said, the appearance is born from the heart. The generation of internal strength is like this. As long as you have a sense of qi, the meridians in your body will naturally generate internal strength. It will be warm, and if you circulate it according to the cultivation method, the internal strength will follow your thoughts and flow in your meridians like a little mouse. If you cultivate for a long time, the mouse will naturally grow. He Tianshu added on as if it was a matter of fact. Warm flow. Flow in my meridians. Zhang Xiaohua's heart skipped a beat. In the past, when she cultivated the Big Dipper fist, there was a warm flow. She guessed that was internal strength. However, as for the meridians, Zhang Xiaohua thought about the cultivation method in the Carefree Heart Sutra. It didn't seem to be the same as the warm flow. So she asked again, Captain He, then is the movement of internal strength in the meridians the same? He Tianshu smiled and said, of course it's not the same. The difference in every cultivation method is in the use of the meridians and the movement of internal strength. If the ethereal divine art is the same as your reckless bull strength, then can it still be called the ethereal divine art? Zhang Xiaohua suddenly understood. However, she still didn't give up and asked, Captain He, is what you said true? Internal strength can't be absorbed from the outside world. He Tianshu said resolutely and decisively, definitely, definitely, definitely. Zhang Xiaohua was speechless. When she cultivated the Carefree Heart Sutra, she really felt the yuan qi of heaven and earth. She also guided it into her body. What was going on? She originally wanted to ask He Tianshu about the disappearance of the yuan qi in her body. Now that she had completely overturned her question about the feeling of qi, she might as well not ask. He Tianshu saw Zhang Xiaohua's discouraged appearance and went forward to pat him on the shoulder, saying, Zhang Xiaohua, failure is the mother of success. You have to be unafraid of hardship, sacrifice, and sweat. If you can't get the feeling of qi in a day, then use 2 days. If 2 days aren't enough, then use 3 days. If you really can't get it after 1 or 2 months, then it's fine. We don't cultivate inner strength cultivation methods and change to outer strength cultivation methods. Look at our Misty School's stone cow, they don't cultivate inner strength cultivation methods, but aren't they still very powerful? Zhang Xiaohua didn't make any excuses and casually looked at He Tianshu's table. He Tianshu looked at his appearance and said awkwardly, the second layer of the ethereal steps is still a bit difficult. I've looked at it, but I still don't understand it. You say, it's clearly a footwork technique, but there are some parts that I don't understand. It's simply inconceivable. I really don't know how Big Sect Leader and the others managed to cultivate it. Don't be anxious. Once I understand it, I'll immediately tell you. You should first learn your reckless bull strength and find the feeling of qi. Zhang Xiaohua also lost interest and said, okay, team leader He. You look at it first. I'll go back and think about it. After saying this, Zhang Xiaohua lowered his head and walked out. He originally thought that he would be able to find a satisfactory answer from He Tianshu, but now, Zhang Xiaohua was even more confused. What was going on? What He Tianshu said was completely different from the Carefree Heart Sutra that he cultivated. Could he have cultivated it wrongly? Behind him, He Tianshu looked at Zhang Xiaohua's back that was filled with thoughts and was secretly worried for him. The path of inner force cultivation techniques had always been about aptitude. If one couldn't find the feeling of qi for a long time, then there was no way to produce inner force, much less channel it and forge the meridians. If Zhang Xiaohua could forget his fist technique to that extent, then his inner force wouldn't be able to escape the same fate. Immediately after, He Tianshu recalled Zhang Xiaohua's intelligence when learning ethereal steps. However, ethereal steps Qigong also required inner strength as a foundation. Without inner strength, no matter how good one's technique was, it would be useless without any foundation. Thinking of this, He Tianshu could only let out a long sigh. Rousing his spirits, he began to study the ethereal steps. Zhang Xiaohua returned to the small house, feeling unwilling to give up. He took out the Carefree Heart Sutra again and carefully read through the first level of the cultivation technique. After confirming that there were no mistakes in his memory, he closed the secret manual and pondered in his heart. The Heart Sutra clearly stated that the heaven and earth was filled with endless yuan qi. The amount of yuan qi absorbed into the body depended on the depth of the cultivator's skills. It wasn't like his perception today where the yuan qi of heaven and earth was in threads. If he didn't have the ability to sense yuan qi, then it was fine. Perhaps he couldn't recognize the endless yuan qi when facing it. But now that he could sense it, then naturally he would be able to sense a large amount of yuan qi. It couldn't be that he could sense some and not some, right? Suddenly, Zhang Xiaohua's eyes lit up. He had just read the first level of the Carefree Heart Sutra. It might not be recorded, but it couldn't be that there were no records of the cultivation technique after that. So he hurriedly opened the Carefree Heart Sutra again. But what made Zhang Xiaohua disappointed was that after he carefully read from beginning to end, he still couldn't find any answers from this secret manual. The other 10 levels of the cultivation technique also talked about the path of cultivation and the description of realms. It seemed that only the first level slightly touched on the yuan qi of heaven and earth. However, Zhang Xiaohua wasn't without any gains. At the end of the Carefree Heart Sutra, it talked about another method of absorbing the yuan qi of heaven and earth. This method wasn't used to absorb the yuan qi of heaven and earth in a gaseous state, but a solid yuan qi of heaven and earth called a yuan stone. According to the records of the Carefree Heart Sutra, although the yuan qi of heaven and earth permeated the entire world, but the density of the yuan qi in different places was different. In some special places, the yuan qi of heaven and earth was shockingly dense. After a long time, it would condense into a yuan stone. According to the time it took to form the yuan stone also came in different sizes. The small ones were like broad beans, while the large ones were like walnuts. These yuan stones were the crystallization of the yuan qi and naturally contained a lot of yuan qi. It could be absorbed by the cultivator for a long time. After the yuan stone was absorbed, it would slowly shrink until it completely disappeared. Zhang Xiaohua was very happy and immediately committed this method to memory. However, the last sentence of the method poured cold water on his head. This method could only be used after the cultivation of the Carefree Heart Sutra to the 9th level. Otherwise, large amounts of yuan qi of heaven and earth would surge into the cultivator's body and cause the cultivator's weak meridians to explode, causing the cultivator to explode and die. Zhang Xiaohua pursed his lips and put the Carefree Heart Sutra back into his clothes. He thought to himself that it was indeed useless again. Not to mention what the yuan stone looked like and where he could find it, just looking at the current situation, he hadn't even entered the first level. Who knew when he would be able to cultivate to the 9th level? Even if he had the yuan stone, he wouldn't dare to absorb it. At night, Zhang Xiaohua went to the forest as usual. First, he practiced his fist techniques, then his sword techniques and his qigong. Needless to say, there was no need to talk about his fist technique and sword technique. His qigong was also becoming more and more proficient. Although he did not have internal energy as a foundation, Zhang Xiaohua's current figure was also very different from before. He used his movement technique to run in the forest, and it actually looked like he was using qigong. However, he could not run high, so it was a waste of his elegant spirit. After doing his homework, Zhang Xiaohua picked a spot under a tree and sat down cross-legged confidently. He circulated the inner strength of the Carefree Heart Sutra and prepared to sense the yuan qi in the outside world and draw it into his body. However, after meditating for a long time, Zhang Xiaohua's senses also roamed outside for a long time, but he still couldn't find any yuan qi. Even the trace of yuan qi that he had felt in the afternoon was nowhere to be found. Helpless, Zhang Xiaohua stood up again and patted the dust off his body. What was going on? Could it be that there was no yuan qi at night? Zhang Xiaohua was depressed. He was just practicing the Carefree Heart Sutra. Why was there so much trouble? It was either something was wrong here or there. It wasn't easy to find the yuan qi, but it disappeared in the afternoon. Where was he going to find it? Actually, he didn't think about it. In this world, learning and cultivation was best if there was someone to guide you. Although the secret manual was the essence of the theory, it recorded other people's experiences. Everyone was different, and there would definitely be differences in cultivation. These differences needed practical experience to make up for. Otherwise, why would it be said that great teachers produce great disciples? Although there were self-taught talents, they were just a drop in the ocean. However, the idea of, where should I find the missing yuan qi, reminded Zhang Xiaohua. Didn't he feel the yuan qi for the first time in the medicinal field at noon? Since he couldn't find it in the forest at night, he might as well try the medicinal field. Since there was still some time before midnight, he wasn't afraid that he wouldn't be able to make it back. Under the moonlight, the medicinal field was exceptionally quiet. If there wasn't a gentle breeze, the herbs swaying in the wind could be seen clearly under the moonlight. It was a wonderful night, but he did not know how lucky Zhang Xiaohua was. Zhang Xiaohua first sat on the ridge of the field, and didn't immediately practice 9 shallow and 1 deep. This was progress. The secret manual didn't say that one needed to calm down before practicing. Without the guidance of a master, one could only gain this experience through trial and error. When Zhang Xiaohua felt that he was ready, he then used the breathing method of the Carefree Heart Sutra to slowly adjust his breathing frequency and gradually enter the state of emptiness. When Zhang Xiaohua released his perception, he couldn't help but be shocked. He almost lost his mind and lost his state of mind. Why? As soon as Zhang Xiaohua released his fish-like perception, he discovered that there was a lot of yuan qi of heaven and earth outside. Wisps of yuan qi fell from the sky like rain, more than 5 times more than during the day. Although it was very different from the description in the Carefree Heart Sutra, it was still a lot more than before. Zhang Xiaohua happily used the method of the Heart Sutra to guide the yuan qi of heaven and earth. Strangely enough, as soon as Zhang Xiaohua guided the first wisp of yuan qi into his body, the other yuan qi seemed to have heard the bugle horn and all rushed to him. Zhang Xiaohua suddenly understood. Previously, he thought that the guiding of yuan qi was like guiding wisps of yuan qi in the daytime. That would take too long to cultivate one's inner strength. Now that he looked at it, under the condition of abundant yuan qi, as long as he guided the first wisp of yuan qi, the other wisps of yuan qi would follow. This was the real trick. It seemed that he didn't take the wrong path. At this time, Zhang Xiaohua was extremely happy. The 100,000 pores on his body were like babies with mouths, competing to suck in the limited amount of yuan qi of heaven and earth. The yuan qi also seemed to be endless. It was just that the amount was very small each time, but the advantage was that it was endless. Thus, Zhang Xiaohua, who was overjoyed, completely forgot about time in this unexpected state. How could he still know what time it was? There seemed to be a faint smile on his face that was devoid of joy or sorrow. Just as that smile appeared, it immediately froze on his face. The pitiful Zhang Xiaohua immediately fell into a dream that a certain senior from the Misty School would be extremely envious of. In his dream, Zhang Xiaohua was still sitting cross-legged. The special breathing method was still the same, and the gurgling stream of yuan qi was still flowing into his body. Only, that flickering in his dream, under the stimulation of the 9 shallow and 1 deep, was once again deeply magnified. An invisible frequency was emitted from Zhang Xiaohua's body, coinciding with the stars in the night sky. Chapter 160. Just as the twinkle in Zhang Xiaohua's dream resonated with the stars in the night sky, the endless starry sky seemed to have received a call and instantly swarmed over, as if passing through time and space. Not long after, Zhang Xiaohua's body was surrounded by countless amounts of star power. The 100,000 pores all over his body that were crying for food opened up as if they had seen a delicacy and tasted it to their heart's content. After the star power and yuan qi were absorbed into the body by the pores, they were so small that they could not be sensed. In his dream, Zhang Xiaohua unconsciously circulated the first level of the Carefree Heart Sutra, pushing them to flow in the meridians according to the circulation route. Just like before, the astral energy was slowly refined into pure yuan qi, and the yuan qi absorbed along with it fused with the yuan qi formed by the astral energy and was refined by the twinkle, leaving behind an even purer yuan qi. This pure yuan qi was stored in Zhang Xiaohua's middle dantian. However, even though there was a lot of astral energy and yuan qi entering Zhang Xiaohua's body, Zhang Xiaohua's meridians were purified to a shocking degree under the effect of the twinkle. 10 halts were gone, and in the end, only a tiny bit of yuan qi was left. However, the purity of that yuan qi was terrifying. Everything was carried out quietly without Zhang Xiaohua's awareness. However, the pure yuan qi was too little, so little that Zhang Xiaohua was unable to sense it. Until the next morning, when the sun rose, Zhang Xiaohua opened his eyes and shook off his clothes that were soaked with dew. However, he still did not know what he had gained from his busy night. Zhang Xiaohua looked around and remembered what happened yesterday. He could not help but smile bitterly and stand up to stretch a little. Although he had meditated through the night, his body did not feel any discomfort. In fact, he felt refreshed and not sleepy at all. He was even more energetic than when he was lying on the Kong bed. Zhang Xiaohua could not help but think to himself, why not sleep in the future and sell the Kong bed in the hut for money so that he could meditate every day. It was still early and the sun had just peeked out from the horizon. Zhang Xiaohua swallowed at the rising sun and another warm current entered his body. Suddenly, Zhang Xiaohua seemed to have thought of something, but he could not figure it out clearly. He tilted his head and thought for a while, but still could not figure it out, so he threw it to the back of his mind. Zhang Xiaohua wanted to practice the Fist of the North Star by the herb field, but unfortunately, there were no trees around the herb field. Zhang Xiaohua had always avoided people when practicing his fist, and now that he was suddenly practicing in an open area, he was not used to it was a little uncomfortable. Thus, he decided to return to the forest to practice his fist and sword arts. But just as he walked to the edge of the forest, he thought of another matter. His fist art would have to be seen by others sooner or later. Not to mention that he only knew this fist art, regardless of whether it was in front of others or behind others, his fist art was still the Fist of the North Star. Although it was made up of different fist arts, it was still a fist art. In the future, there was no need to avoid people. Besides, he still wanted to participate in the Misty School's martial arts exhibition. If he did not use the Fist of the North Star, what else could he use? He might as well practice his fist art openly and not care about what others said. As for Elder Yu's sword art, he was instructed not to let others see it when he was teaching it. Thus, he could only avoid people when he practiced his sword art. Just as he was thinking, Zhang Xiaohua walked into the forest. Suddenly, he heard a "pada" sound. It was the sound of a person falling down. Zhang Xiaohua was shocked. It was broad daylight. Could it be that someone was doing something bad in the forest? Immediately, Zhang Xiaohua executed the ethereal steps and quickly walked into the depths of the forest. Who knew that just as Zhang Xiaohua took a few steps, he heard the sound coming from the depths of the forest. A series of curses was heard. XXX, why is the ethereal steps so difficult? This footwork is obviously wrong. That voice was very familiar. It was Zhang Xiaohua's chief master, He Tianshu. Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but be delighted. Captain He, why are you up so early? When Zhang Xiaohua arrived at the scene, He Tianshu had just climbed up from the ground and was patting the dust off his body. With an awkward expression, he said, Zhang Xiaohua. Why are you here? Why didn't I hear your footsteps? Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, I usually practice my fist art in the forest. Just now, I heard a strange sound, so I came over to take a look. Perhaps Captain He was too focused on practicing and didn't hear my footsteps. He Tianshu raised his eyebrows, strange sound. And I also heard it just now. It seems like a little bird kicked the tree branch and broke it. Don't bother about it. Zhang Xiaohua found it funny and said, I think so. But why is Captain He up so early today? He Tianshu took out a few pieces of paper from his bosom and casually waved it around, saying, "Isn't this the Ethereal Steps manual? After you left yesterday, I took a careful look at it, but I still couldn't figure out how to use this footwork. I didn't even sleep well, so I came here to practice before dawn. However, this footwork is just as I thought. There are many places that I can't use. I don't know if these are written wrongly." Not only did Zhang Xiaohua not believe his words, even He Tianshu himself didn't sound very confident. Perhaps he was trying to find an excuse for the little bird that broke the tree branch. Zhang Xiaohua's curiosity was piqued as she asked, "Captain He, is it really that magical? Even you can't understand it? You are the god in my heart. You must continue to work hard and don't disappoint me." He Tianshu curled his lips and said, "It's true. Don't doubt me." Sigh, if only I was Zhang Xiaohu. Zhang Xiaohua asked curiously, "Why is it my second brother?" He Tianshu said enviously, "If I were Zhang Xiaohu, I would definitely take this Ethereal Steps manual to his master and he would definitely tell me the secret of this place. You don't understand, Zhang Xiaohua. There's a world of difference between fumbling around and having a master guiding you. As the saying goes, the predecessor plants the tree, the successor enjoys the shade. That's the logic behind it." Zhang Xiaohua nodded her head like a chick pecking at rice. What he said was true. If her master was by her side, she wouldn't have to ponder so hard. She could just casually ask and get the answer. Wouldn't that be great? However, if she acknowledged this master, her second brother would still have to live a precarious life in the escort agency. In comparison, Zhang Xiaohua was still satisfied with the current outcome. Fighting with the heavens was endless joy. Fighting with the earth was endless joy. Wouldn't it be equally endless joy if she fought with herself? Although that was the case, it was fine to have restless thoughts. However, the footwork still had to be pondered. He Tianshu said to Zhang Xiaohua, "Practice your fist technique by the side. Don't disturb me. I'll give it another try. I don't believe that with my talent of sensing qi in 2 days back then, it's impossible for me to not understand this basic footwork." With that said, he waved his hand and gestured for Zhang Xiaohua to go about her own business. He then looked at the few thin pages of paper. Zhang Xiaohua thought about it and knew that she couldn't be of any help again. She prepared to turn and leave. But at that moment, He Tianshu looked at the footwork while walking on the spot. Involuntarily, he attracted Zhang Xiaohua's gaze. He had already learned the first level of ethereal steps. He was only lacking the basic inner strength and was unable to use it. He had never heard of this footwork used in a martial arts competition. When He Tianshu used it, it naturally attracted his attention. He wanted to see the true face of the Misty School's signature technique. He saw He Tianshu looking at the footwork while stepping to the left and right in a narrow space. Sometimes, he would step on the same spot, and sometimes he would take a big step far away. It left Zhang Xiaohua baffled. As she watched, He Tianshu's 2 feet stepped on the same spot. He Tianshu lost his balance and was about to fall. Thankfully, He Tianshu seemed to be prepared. His body swayed and he stepped on the ground beside him, ending the footwork practice. Zhang Xiaohua knew that He Tianshu probably didn't know how to use it in this place, resulting in his fall. Just as she was thinking, He Tianshu persevered and began practicing again. This time, Zhang Xiaohua focused and carefully looked at He Tianshu's footwork. It was very complicated. Even with Zhang Xiaohua's somewhat enlightened mind, she could only remember about 30 to 40% of it. Similarly, when he reached the same spot, He Tianshu made another mistake and nearly fell. Pooey! He Tianshu spat on the ground and carefully kept the paper in his hand. He said fiercely, "I don't believe that I can't teach you a lesson. Only then did he raise his head and see Zhang Xiaohua watching by the side. He couldn't help but ask in surprise, "Zhang Xiaohua, why aren't you practicing your boxing?" Zhang Xiaohua said with a smile, "Captain He, I saw that you were practicing quite well. Why don't I learn a little from you?" He Tianshu said unhappily, "I haven't practiced it yet. How can I teach you? You'd better wait a little longer." Right after he said that, He Tianshu suddenly changed his mind and said, "All right, since you're so eager to learn, I'll teach you some of the footwork I just learned." After saying that, he made a pose and said, "You just follow my footwork behind me and practice step by step." Zhang Xiaohua ran behind He Tianshu happily and said, "All right, Captain He, you can start now." He Tianshu smiled and said, "All right, I'll start now. Follow me." Then, according to his own understanding, he performed the footwork he just performed at a very slow speed again. Zhang Xiaohua followed behind him. Perhaps because she had seen it twice just now, Zhang Xiaohua didn't have much difficulty performing it. When He Tianshu saw this, he sped up. When he reached the difficult point, He Tianshu first stepped in the same place, but it was just a pose. Then, he turned around and leaped to the side. He looked at Zhang Xiaohua with a playful smile. Zhang Xiaohua, who was eager to learn, didn't have any other thoughts. When she reached the difficult point with He Tianshu, she suddenly saw He Tianshu stop and stand to the side. She was shocked, but she didn't know why, but her 2 feet naturally followed He Tianshu's pose and stepped in the same place at the same time. This was the effect He Tianshu wanted. He quietly waited for Zhang Xiaohua to fall. At this moment, Zhang Xiaohua's body had already tilted to one side, just like He Tianshu. However, at this moment, Zhang Xiaohua was staring blankly at He Tianshu, who was standing at the side and watching the show. He did not intentionally control his falling body. However, at this moment, his right foot that was about to step on his other foot naturally took a small step forward and missed him. Immediately, his right leg followed his body to the side and straightened his unbalanced body. Then, he changed his position and moved his body to another place. This very natural change made He Tianshu, who wanted to see Zhang Xiaohua make a fool of herself, drop his eyeballs to the ground. What was going on? He Tianshu walked forward excitedly and asked, "Zhang Xiaohua, have you seen this footwork before?" Zhang Xiaohua stood there in a daze. She didn't understand and said, "Captain He, of course I haven't seen it before. I don't understand it." He Tianshu took out a few thin pieces of paper and pointed to a spot on it. He said, "Since you haven't seen it before, how did you execute this footwork so accurately? This last step is actually exactly the same as what was written in the secret manual. I tried this position and angled a few times just now, but I didn't succeed. I was so tired that I even fell to the ground." At this point, He Tianshu didn't care about his face anymore and spilled everything out. Zhang Xiaohua frowned and said, "How would I know? I only executed it according to the footwork you taught me." He Tianshu didn't believe her and said, "Zhang Xiaohua, can you execute it again?" Zhang Xiaohua recalled in her mind and said, "I'll try. I should be able to." After saying that, she followed her memory and combined it with He Tianshu's impression. She executed it step by step. Although Zhang Xiaohua hadn't executed the difficult part just now, He Tianshu had already executed it. He Tianshu was deeply aware of the complexity of the ethereal steps. It was only after a few days of seclusion that he was able to gain a rough understanding of the ethereal steps. Previously, he had only been able to execute it fluently because of the secret manual. It seemed like this was the first time Zhang Xiaohua had seen him execute the ethereal steps. He had only seen it a few times and he had already mastered it so perfectly. This seemed to be very different from his impression of the clumsy Zhang Xiaohua who learned fish techniques. However, the final result was another blow to He Tianchu's self-confidence. Zhang Xiaohua actually executed the difficult part perfectly. She turned around beautifully and stopped in her tracks. She smiled and asked, "Captain He, do you think it should be executed like this?" He Tianshu stuttered and said in disbelief, "Yes, it's like this." Immediately, he threw Zhang Xiaohua aside and practiced it again in disbelief. Unfortunately, he still stopped at the difficult part and almost fell. He Tianshu was puzzled. Why couldn't he do it well? Why did this Zhang Xiaohua succeed in one try? Hence, He Tianshu walked to Zhang Xiaohua's side and rubbed his hands. He asked, "Zhang Xiaohua, how did you do it just now? How did you manage to take that step so easily? I see that you slide quite beautifully. You really have my style. Can you tell me how you control your body when you're about to fall?" Zhang Xiaohua tilted her head and thought for a while. She said, "Captain He, I don't know exactly how I did it. However, I didn't control my body. I just extended my leg naturally. That sliding step was also done casually. I felt that it was very suitable for my body." He Tianshu was puzzled. He said, "Your body is already crooked. How can you not control it? You just let yourself fall." Zhang Xiaohua nodded. "Yes, that's it." He Tianshu thought for a while and said, "I know. As long as you let nature take its course, your left foot will definitely let your right foot pass. Do the sliding step." Zhang Xiaohua couldn't explain it, so she said, "I think so. Anyway, I didn't do anything." He Tianshu nodded and began to practice again. However, Captain He was even more miserable this time. His body fell to the ground, hard and fast. He Tianshu jumped up from the ground and shouted in exasperation, "Didn't you say that you didn't do anything? Why can't you fall?" Zhang Xiaohua scratched her head and said, "Maybe it's a problem of character. Captain He, when I came back from Ethereal Heights yesterday, I helped an old woman cross the road." How could He Tianshu believe this? He gestured and said, "First, I put my left foot here, then my right foot here. My body is crooked. Since you said to follow my body, I naturally used my strength to walk here. Then, my body was still crooked. The more I tried to use strength, the more crooked my body was. What's going on?" Seeing He Tianshu muttering like a devil, Zhang Xiaohua was very puzzled. She asked, "Captain He, why do you need to use your strength to step forward? What strength are you using?" He Tianshu was a little impatient. He said, "Of course it's internal strength. Without internal strength, how can your steps be fast and elegant?" Zhang Xiaohua pouted. "Captain He, when did I have internal strength? I haven't found my sense of qi yet." He Tianshu heard this and his expression changed. He slapped his forehead and seemed to understand. His cheap disciple didn't have any internal strength at all. How could she use her strength to her feet? After finding out the reason, He Tianshu couldn't wait to practice again. Sure enough, this time, he was successful. He Tianshu was not only happy, but also had a strange feeling. This footwork actually rejected internal strength. Sigh. He Tianshu sighed. He didn't know what he was thinking about. Then, he raised his feet and prepared to walk away. Zhang Xiaohua quickly caught up and asked, "Captain He, are we not practicing anymore? It's still early. Breakfast isn't ready yet." He Tianshu said curiously, "I've been studying it for a long time, but this is all I know. How can I continue practicing? Why don't I give you this secret manual and you can practice it first?" After saying this, he acted as if he was going to take something out. When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she quickly waved her hand. What a joke. She had just looked at it and saw that it was full of small feet. Looking at it gave her a headache. She knew very well how difficult it was to be self-taught. Since someone was willing to teach her, why should she take the unorthodox path? Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, I'm just worried about Captain He's body. It's still early for breakfast, so why don't you practice? As the saying goes, work is for the villa, but the body is for the individual. You must take care of your body. Please add it to your collection, thank you. Chapter 161. He Tianshu was only joking. If he were to give the secret manual to Zhang Xiaohua, what would he learn? With Zhang Xiaohua's half-baked level, how would he be able to understand the profound, ethereal steps? If he were to give it to Zhang Xiaohua, he would not feel at ease. He Tianshu saw that Zhang Xiaohua was tactful and said, It's not that I don't want to practice, but I have already finished comprehending the contents of the past few days. If I were to continue, there would only be leftovers. I might as well take a look at the back. Moreover, speaking up to this point, he rolled his eyes and grumbled, If I were to practice the footwork in front of you, I'm afraid it would hurt my confidence. Zhang Xiaohua did not understand and tugged at He Tianshu's sleeves, angrily saying, Captain He, how can you say that? I am wholeheartedly trying to learn from you. If you don't explain clearly, I will go to the manor lord and sue you for slander. He Tianshu smiled and said, Zhang Xiaohua, I really cannot see through you. If you are smart, then you can't even learn the basic Arhat fist. You can't even sense the qi in a simple internal cultivation method like the frenzied bull's strength. It can be said that you are not cut out for martial arts. But if I were to say that you are stupid, look at your horse stance and the ethereal steps you learned. I don't even know what to say and can only describe you as a genius. Zhang Xiaohua waved his hand and said, Captain He thinks too highly of me. The footwork just now did not use any internal energy. Isn't it just a coincidence that I don't have any internal energy? He Tianshu pretended to disagree and said, That's not true, that's not true. The footwork that I was practicing just now was actually something that I had comprehended for many days. The profoundness of the ethereal steps is very great and every step is very particular. It's not something that can be casually memorized and used. I had to carefully ponder over many details before I was able to learn it. How could I be like you? Just by watching me use it a few times and being able to imitate it and learn it with a bit of practice. Just this perception alone is enough to make me envious. Zhang Xiaohua was speechless. He had only just seen a shadow of the martial arts palace and had no idea about the structure inside. What right did he have to speak? He Tianshu scratched the short beard under his chin and said thoughtfully, Actually, what that Li Jinfeng young master said makes sense. With your smart brain, you should still study literature. Right now, your hand is not very good, and I don't know when it will recover. The chances of you making a name for yourself in martial arts are not high. Right now, your fist techniques are already able to protect yourself. Switching to writing is also a very good path for you. Zhang Xiaohua shook her head like a rattledrum and said, Being literate and well-read, of course I'm willing, I also like it. However, I prefer the carefree feeling of brandishing a stick. As the ancients say, 10 steps kill one person, 1,000 li do not leave a trace. Just thinking about it makes me feel relaxed and happy. This is the realm I'm pursuing. He Tianshu shook his head and said, How can it be as easy as you think? In this world, things are often easy to think about, but difficult to do. The days in the Jianghu are filled with foul winds and bloody rain. You've only just seen a corner of the harmonious world. It's not too much to say that you're looking at a leopard through a tube. Practice is the only way to test the truth. Only when you walk on your own will you know the hardships. When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she immediately thought of her second brother's situation. She couldn't help but feel touched and didn't say anything else. The two of them walked out of the forest one after the other. When they reached the small courtyard, Tianshu said to Zhang Xiaohua, "That's right, Zhang Xiaohua, Nie Xiaoer and the rest have been cooped up in the medicine hall these few days to prepare for the martial arts exhibition. As for me, I also want to comprehend the ethereal steps and work in the medicine fields." Tianshu's words were a little forced. Yan had already clearly instructed that if Zhang Xiaohua was willing to work in the fields, then she could do so. If she didn't want to, then it was up to her. During this period of time, Zhang Xiaohua didn't slack off and spend a lot of time in the medicine fields. But that was because Tianshu and the rest of the people from the medicine hall were all there. Now that they had something to do, they pushed all the work to Zhang Xiaohua. This made Tianshu feel a little ashamed. Zhang Xiaohua didn't think too much about it and said, "It's all right, Captain He. You guys go ahead. I'll take care of all the work in the fields." Just as she finished speaking, Zhang Xiaohua suddenly thought of the situation of cultivating in the medicine fields at night and immediately added, "How about this, Captain He? I'll just set up a shed in the medicine fields and stay there at night." These were Zhang Xiaohua's heartfelt words, but in Tianshu's ears, it naturally had a different meaning. He widened his eyes and said, "Zhang Xiaohua, you don't have to exaggerate like that. I'll also go to the medicine fields when I have time. Don't think too much about it. This martial arts exhibition is an important test that every disciple of the Misty School has to face every year. It's very important for their future development. Nie Xiaoer and the others aren't really slacking off, they just can't let go of that side." The current Zhang Xiaohua was already mentally mature. How could she not understand Tianshu's meaning? She hurriedly said, "Captain He, I'm speaking from the bottom of my heart. When the crops at our Guizhuang house are ripe, we set up straw huts next to the fields to take care of the crops. This is a custom. I don't have any intention of slacking off at all." Tianshu had never done farm work before, so he naturally didn't know. However, he also believed that with Zhang Xiaohua's character, she wouldn't do something that would undermine him. He could only wave his hand and say, "Do as you see fit. Anyways, I think that what you're doing is a bit exaggerated." The two of them went their separate ways and returned to their respective houses. That morning, it was a very cloudy day and the sun couldn't be seen. However, this didn't affect Zhang Xiaohua's good mood at all. To be honest, there wasn't much work to be done in the medicinal field. It was just weeding, watering, and getting rid of insects. She didn't know what was going on in the medicinal field. There weren't too many insects, but the weeds were growing like crazy. It was different from the farmland at the Guizhuang house. If it wasn't cleaned up for a day, a lot of weeds would grow. However, these tasks were enough for Zhang Xiaohua to do alone. Sometimes Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but wonder if the pharmaceutical hall put so many people in the medicinal field because there were too many people in the Misty School. The cost was also high, so they put a few people to be raised in the Huanqi manor. Zhang Xiaohua easily finished the work and started to practice his worry-free heart sutra. This medicinal field was a good place. Not only could he easily sense qi and draw it into his body, but this place was also a restricted area in the Huanqi manor. Ordinary guards and servants were not allowed to come close. Otherwise, Zhang Xiaohua, who had been meditating in the medicinal field for the whole night, would have been discovered by the patrolling guards. Zhang Xiaohua was also very relaxed in drawing qi into his body. However, when the qi disappeared into his body, Zhang Xiaohua's heart suddenly moved. It seemed like he was touched by something. However, when he thought about it again, there was no trace of it. He couldn't help but be puzzled. What was going on these 2 days? He was always startled and felt like he had thought of something, but he didn't know what it was. It was really puzzling. Just as he was feeling puzzled, he suddenly thought of another matter. He had to talk to Manor Head O about the matter of building a shed. If he didn't agree, how could he make the decision on his own? Wouldn't that become an illegal building? Thinking of this, Zhang Xiaohua stopped cultivating. He stood up and quickly walked into the inner courtyard. Zhang Xiaohua was currently the manor head's favorite. This fact was known by everyone in the inner courtyard. This was because Zhang Xiaohua didn't need to report when he entered the inner courtyard. As long as the manor head was in the hall, he could be brought in by someone. However, very few of them knew the inside story. However, this didn't affect their good impression of Zhang Xiaohua. Qiuju brought Zhang Xiaohua into the inner courtyard. As she walked, she was blushing and secretly peeking at Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohua was also puzzled as he walked. Didn't he secretly wipe his face? He thought to himself, could it be that I didn't wash my face properly just now? This guy had forgotten that it was his first time in the inner courtyard and he had casually done a good deed in the autumn chrysanthemum courtyard. When he entered the hall, O Yen and Elder Yu were sitting inside and discussing something. When O Yen saw Zhang Xiaohua enter, she was very enthusiastic and asked, Xiaohua, why are you looking for me today? Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, I'm free today, so I came to see big sister O. O Yen said, who would believe you? Do you think I don't know what's going on in the medicinal field? Right now, Nye Xiao'er and the others are practicing martial arts in the medicinal field. They don't have any extra energy to spare here. With your personality, you won't let go and must be busy in the medicinal field. Where would you find the time to spare? Zhang Xiaohua chuckled. She didn't seem to realize that her lie had been exposed. She cupped her hands and said, Big Sister O's eyes are indeed as bright as torches. You can even see through my little thoughts. Elder Yu also smiled and said, Zhang Xiaohua, when you first came, you were so simple. It's only been a few days and you've already learned how to be glib. Zhang Xiaohua blushed slightly and said, Elder Yu, look at what you're saying. I'm showing my maturity. O Yen said, forget it, don't hang out with Ma Jing and the others in the future. They're all unreliable. Oh right, what's the matter? Zhang Xiaohua said seriously, it's like this, Big Sister O. Didn't you just say that there's not enough manpower in the medicinal field? I thought that since I have nothing to do, why don't I set up a shed next to the medicinal field at night and take it as watching over the crops? What do you think? Elder Yu and O Yen looked at each other and felt that it was strange. O Yen asked, Zhang Xiaohua, I know that you're wholeheartedly devoted to the manor. No matter how busy you are in the medicinal field, you don't have to work through the night. You're exaggerating. Elder Yu also shook his head. Zhang Xiaohua explained in a low voice, Big Sister O, it's like this. In our village, during the summer or autumn harvest, we also set up a straw shed in the field. On one hand, it's to watch over the crops. On the other hand, it's also to work nearby. I'm also a little homesick, so I thought of this idea. O Yan's expression softened and said, Zhang Xiaohua, how long have you been out? Zhang Xiaohua said without hesitation, 1 year and 4 months. O Yan said, and how can a young child like you not be homesick after such a long time? How about this, I'll give you some time off to go home and take a look, okay? Really? Zhang Xiaohua stood up in surprise and asked, then, will you deduct my monthly salary? O Yan didn't know whether to laugh or cry and said, no, just take it as a paid annual leave. Zhang Xiaohua thought for a moment and said, that's great, it'll be best if Big Sister O sends me to Lu Town on official business. O Yan asked curiously, why is that? Zhang Xiaohua smiled slyly and said, isn't there still a subsidy? Elder Yu rubbed his forehead with his only arm, his face full of helplessness. He had entrusted his sword skills to the wrong person. O Yen said, okay, I'll let you go to Lu Town on official business. You don't have to build that straw shed anymore. Zhang Xiaohua tilted her head and thought for a moment, then said, I still can't, big sister Oh. Captain He and the others are busy now, and there's no one in the medicinal field, so I don't feel at ease leaving. Moreover, it's not good for me to go home alone. I have to go with my second brother, but he just entered the Misty School and it's very inappropriate for him to take leave now. Lastly, I still have something to ask big sister Oh. I'm afraid that I won't have time to go back during this period. Oh Yen was stunned and said, what else do you have to say? Why don't you say it together? Zhang Xiaohua said, I'll wait for big sister Oh to agree to the first thing first, then I'll talk about the rest. Oh Yen giggled as if she was looking at her naughty little brother and said, okay, building a shed isn't a big deal, so I'll agree. However, the weather is still cold now, so don't catch a cold at night. Zhang Xiaohua was overjoyed and said, thank you, big sister Oh. Oh Yen smiled and said, why aren't you talking about the other thing? Zhang Xiaohua hurriedly said, big sister Oh, the Misty School is holding a martial arts exhibition right now. I heard from Captain He that when he was young, he seemed to have seen people from Huanxi Mountain Villa participate in it. I want to ask if our Huanxi Mountain Villa can also participate in this martial arts exhibition. Oh Yen was stunned when she heard this and said, yes, not only can our Huanxi Mountain Villa participate, even the Lotus Escort Agency can participate. When I was young, I also participated with the representatives of Huanxi Mountain Villa. But when Zhang Xiaohua heard that she could participate, she was overjoyed and said, it's great that we can participate. Big sister Oh, I want to participate in this martial arts exhibition. Is it possible? When she said this, not only was Oh Yen puzzled, even Elder Yu was also puzzled. Elder Yu asked, Zhang Xiaohua, this martial arts exhibition is a competition of martial arts. Are your martial arts very good? Even if you have killed the black-clothed man with a high level of martial arts, you can't use that kind of sword technique against the ethereal sex brothers. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, Elder Yu, look at what you're saying. How can I not know about this matter? I definitely won't use sword moves in the martial arts exhibition. Elder Yu said, if you don't use sword moves, what will you use? Do you know anything else? Zhang Xiaohua said innocently, Elder Yu, haven't you seen me fight before? I also know a set of fished moves. Elder Yu found it funny, but he didn't have the heart to discourage her and only said, hee, I've seen your incomplete set of fist moves pieced together. It looks ordinary. Oh Yen, who was at the side, kindly reminded her, Zhang Xiaohua, it's not that I don't want you to participate in the martial arts exhibition, but it has been a long time since someone from our villa participated. Moreover, our participation in the martial arts exhibition is different from the disciples from the Misty School. They participate in the martial arts exhibition in order to advance and obtain new martial arts and high-level fist moves to learn. Our villa's representative is purely here to exchange martial arts. If you win, it will be glorious, but there won't be any benefits. If you lose, then your face will be swept to the ground. When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she naturally understood and said, I know, big sister Oh. I only want to exchange pointers with others for fun, not for any benefits. You also know my aptitude. I can't sense any chi at all when cultivating internal energy. Even if I know a set of fished moves, I don't have the extravagant hope of winning. When Oh Yan heard this, she still said, but Zhang Xiaohua, you have to know that if you participate in the martial arts exhibition, because you aren't a disciple from the Misty School, you can only compete with the first disciple. Before Oh Yan finished speaking, Zhang Xiaohua interrupted, I know, big sister Oh. I'm not a beginner, so it's fine if I lose to anyone. When Oh Yan heard this, she said, all right then. Since you know and are willing to participate, I'll find someone to ask about the rules. After all, Our Huanxi Villa hasn't sent a representative to participate in the martial arts exhibition for a long time, so I don't know the rules. However, Zhang Xiaohua, your spirit of facing difficulties is commendable, so I can't not help you. At this moment, Elder Yu asked softly, Zhang Xiaohua, you said that you can't sense qi when cultivating internal energy. What kind of internal energy cultivation method are you cultivating? Who taught you? When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she took out the reckless bull force and handed it to Elder Yu. She then told him about how Zhang Xiaohua had helped her obtain this internal energy cultivation method. Elder Yu took the reckless bull's force manual and read it carefully before handing it back to Zhang Xiaohua. He gestured for Zhang Xiaohua to keep it properly and said with a chuckle, I knew it. I heard that you were lucky and obtained this supreme Nigong Heart Sutra. I thought that you really managed to cultivate Nigong Heart Sutra from it. So it turns out that you're cultivating this book. Zhang Xiaohua's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't say anything. On the other hand, Yan was also a smart person. She immediately thought of something and asked, Zhang Xiaohua, tell me the truth. Did you really set up the shed next to the medicinal field so that you could work for a long time? Zhang Xiaohua opened her mouth, but she didn't know what to say. Was she really supposed to say that she was there so that she could absorb qi into her body? At this moment, Elder Yu spoke in a very friendly manner, Zhang Xiaohua, did you not sense qi when cultivating this reckless bull force? Zhang Xiaohua nodded in agreement. Elder Yu asked again, then did you ask He Tianshu for help? He advised you to try it more often, or to try it out in an open area at night. When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, he was secretly delighted. It seemed that Elder Yu had misunderstood him. However, he couldn't find a reason to push the blame to He Tianshu. After all, He Tianshu was his chief master. It was better for him to die than for him to die. This was far from death. Thus, Zhang Xiaohua still nodded her head. Elder Yu sighed and said, Zhang Xiaohua, I've been paying attention to you ever since you started practicing martial arts. I know that you're a resilient child who can endure hardships and isn't afraid of hardships. That's why I've been treating you differently. However, the path of martial arts is all about comprehension. Many times, hard work won't be able to make up for your lack of talent. I really admire you for having the thought to set up a shed in the medicinal field so that you can focus on sensing qi in the middle of the night. When I was young, I didn't even put in as much effort as you. However, Zhang Xiaohua, if it's meant to be, then it will be. If it's not meant to be, then don't force it. There are many things that you have to be open-minded about. Elder Yu's consecutive, but made Zhang Xiaohua's expression change. Chapter 162. Seeing the change in Zhang Xiaohua's expression, Elder Yu also felt that his words were a bit harsh, as if he had struck a blow to this diligent country boy's heart. He rephrased his words slightly and continued, I've also seen you practice the fish technique. Your comprehension is extremely poor, so you can't learn the entire set of fish techniques. However, this is also fine. It doesn't affect you much if you don't know how. However, this internal cultivation method is different. It's purely a matter of life and death. If you're not careful and go crazy, you'll be seriously injured and your life will be in danger. This reckless bull force is a good thing. It's easy to understand and is very suitable for you. However, I still have to remind you that if you try many times and still can't sense qi, then don't go down a dead end. It's better to give up and take a step back. You can also try external martial arts. It's also very good. After listening for a long time, Zhang Xiaohua finally understood that Elder Yu was still concerned about him and didn't treat him as an outsider. Zhang Xiaohua was very grateful and said to Elder Yu, I understand your good intentions, but there's a hidden meaning behind the straw shed. These few days, Captain, he has also told me a lot of things to take note of. I will be careful. Right now, I'm just looking for a sense of qi. I haven't circulated my qi yet, so there won't be any big problems. Elder Yu, don't worry. Don't worry. Then he turned to O Yen and said, Sister O, the main purpose of building the straw shed is to look at the medicinal field. Practicing martial arts is also secondary. O Yen saw that he was so considerate and didn't blame him. She said, It's okay, Zhang Xiaohua. Even if you want to practice martial arts, Sister is willing to support you. However, it's better to be careful. Don't practice at night without caring about your life just to win the martial arts competition. Zhang Xiaohua bowed and said, I understand, Sister O. O Yen asked again, Then how do you build the straw shed? Do you need help from the people in the village? Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, No need. I've been building straw sheds since I was young. I don't need anyone's help. I can finish it in an afternoon. O Yen smiled and said, Then you can go and get whatever materials you need from the warehouse. Zhang Xiaohua was overjoyed when she got the confirmation. She took her leave and rushed to the warehouse to get her things. When Zhang Xiaohua was young, she often built thatched huts in the fields with her father and elder brother. Naturally, she was familiar with them. Moreover, it was just to block the dew. It was not exquisite, so it was even easier. Zhang Xiaohua finished it in an afternoon. Moreover, because he hadn't done any heavy work for a long time, Zhang Xiaohua seemed to feel that his strength had increased a lot when he picked up the wood in the afternoon. He could pick up a lot of thick and heavy wood with one hand. Zhang Xiaohua was a little puzzled. Could it be that this strength would continue to increase as she aged? He didn't know how much strength he had now. In addition, when Zhang Xiaohua was laying the straw and tying the rope, she could clearly feel that the fingers on her right hand were more flexible. It seemed that the injury on her bones had already healed. Happy things happened one after another. It was really Zhang Xiaohua's happy life. The straw shed was built next to the medicinal field. It was lonely and looked very out of place. However, other than Zhang Xiaohua, no one else came to see it. Who would have any objections? For the whole day, Zhang Xiaohua didn't see He Tianshu. She guessed that he was pulling his hair in his room to comprehend. Hopefully, he wouldn't be bald early when he came out. Dusk arrived as promised. Zhang Xiaohua sat cross-legged in the straw shed. He faced the setting sun in the west. It dyed the clouds in the distance red and was incomparably gorgeous. He looked at it silently and felt very emotional. The setting sun was infinitely beautiful. It was just that dusk was approaching. The beautiful scenery in front of him only attracted Zhang Xiaohua's attention for a moment. Immediately, he closed his eyes and started to circulate the qi according to the Carefree Heart Sutra. The qi of vitality was still the same. There wasn't a lot. It flowed down bit by bit. Zhang Xiaohua was not in a hurry and only guided it slowly. After a while, Zhang Xiaohua's body seemed to have become a magnet, automatically absorbing the qi of vitality. Therefore, Zhang Xiaohua had more time to appreciate the qi of vitality that was introduced into his body. The qi of vitality in one's pores was so subtle that Zhang Xiaohua still didn't get anything. The Carefree Heart Sutra also didn't talk about how to sense the qi of vitality that entered the body. It only talked about how to move the qi of vitality that entered the body. Therefore, Zhang Xiaohua naturally didn't know how to do it. After pondering for a long time without any results, Zhang Xiaohua was a little impatient. His thoughts were a little broken. He thought about the difference between the Spirit of the Bull and the Carefree Heart Sutra. Just as he was thinking, an idea suddenly appeared in Zhang Xiaohua's mind. It lit up him like lightning. He remembered that He Tianshu had said that the feeling of qi of internal strength was not really a warm current flowing in from the forehead at the beginning. The warm current in the meridians was generated by the thoughts of the practitioner. Then, although he couldn't sense the chi of vitality in his pores, could he still think about it? At this time, Zhang Xiaohua finally understood. He always felt that something important in his mind these days, but he couldn't find a clue. It turned out that it was here. Speaking of this, he couldn't help but clap his hands and praise Zhang Xiaohua. Most of the things in the world were impermanent. Just like the paths on the land, they were originally insignificant. However, after many people walked on them, they naturally became roads. The Heart Sutra didn't talk about how to sense the traceless chi of vitality, but Zhang Xiaohua borrowed the idea of using the idea to promote the cultivation of chi of vitality. He really could be called a genius. However, if this kind of genius fell into the eyes of an internal strength master, he would definitely scoff and shake his head secretly. There was only one comment: the ignorant are fearless. With a plan in mind, Zhang Xiaohua began to experiment. He imagined that his pores were filled with chi of vitality. According to the Heart Sutra, he absorbed them into the meridians in his body. Then, according to the Heart Sutra, he still followed the Heart Sutra in his mind and circulated the invisible chi of vitality along the meridians in his body. After one cycle of circulation, it returned to the middle dantian. Zhang Xiaohua didn't continue to circulate his internal strength. Instead, he first sensed his own body and didn't find anything strange. This meant that although he didn't know if the Heart Sutra was effective, at least there was no harm. Thus, Zhang Xiaohua continued to circulate his internal strength. After 36 cycles, he stopped. When he opened his eyes, it was already night. Thinking that he hadn't practiced his fist technique and sword moves yet, Zhang Xiaohua walked out of the straw hut. The sky outside was dark again, and there were no moon or stars. Taking advantage of the night, Zhang Xiaohua practiced his sword moves and Big Dipper fist. When the cold current flowed through his body, Zhang Xiaohua felt incomparably comfortable. After ending the fist technique, Zhang Xiaohua discovered a new problem. In the past, he always thought that the flow of the fist technique was in his meridians, but today, he just thought about the flow of chi of vitality. This was the meridians recorded in the Heart Sutra, so it should be the real meridians. These meridians were different from the meridians involved in the fist technique. Why was that? Moreover, the sword moves that Elder Yu taught him could also cause a warm current to flow through his left hand. This warm current didn't flow through his entire body, only his left arm. Perhaps it was a part of his meridians, but it wasn't recorded in the Heart Sutra, so why was that? In order to find out the reason, Zhang Xiaohua practiced the Big Dipper fist a few more times, carefully feeling the flow of the energy. When Zhang Xiaohua stopped and looked back, he suddenly realized that the flow of the Big Dipper fist didn't seem to flow through the meridians in his body. Or more accurately, the flow actually flowed through all the bones in Zhang Xiaohua's body. The 108 fist techniques, each move would cause the flow of energy to flow through a bone. When the fist technique was finished, it would flow through all 108 bones in his body. Zhang Xiaohua's brain couldn't process it. The fist technique that he pieced together had such an effect. What was this fist technique doing? Could it be that it was tempering his bones? This was a question that had no answer. No one could answer him. Zhang Xiaohua touched his smooth chin and stopped thinking. He knew that there was no one he could ask, so why did he have to make things difficult for himself? Someone once said, why should a woman make things difficult for another woman? Then, why should he make things difficult for himself? Since he didn't want to make things difficult for himself, the warm current caused by the sword move came even more abruptly. It wasn't within the scope of Zhang Xiaohua's consideration. Zhang Xiaohua returned to the straw hut with an indescribable feeling in his heart. Uneasy. How could that be? This was the Big Dipper fist technique that he personally named. If he didn't have great achievements in martial arts, all kinds of medicinal herbs could let him live a comfortable life without worrying about not being able to eat red braised pork. This was Zhang Xiaohua's lofty dream. After reading for a long time, Zhang Xiaohua reluctantly closed the book. Knowledge was the best spiritual food for human beings. Zhang Xiaohua's heart was sad. But his body's intuition clearly told him that the time was not early. It was almost midnight. You should close the book and prepare to rest. Zhang Xiaohua had to pack up his things and blow out the oil lamp. It must be said that this person was strange. Zhang Xiaohua had always been in the Guozhuang house and slept very early. He didn't know that he had to sleep at midnight, so he didn't think much of it. After coming out, after a few times, he knew. His body naturally had a kind of adaptability. When it was almost time, he would have a kind of intuition. Although he didn't watch the night people knock on the clappers and announce the time, he still knew. After packing up everything, Zhang Xiaohua walked to the middle of the straw hut and sat cross-legged. He faced the sky and took in the 9 shallow and 1 deep breathing. Not long after, he entered the realm of emptiness and began his routine of drawing qi into his body. When Zhang Xiaohua woke up in the morning, he didn't immediately get up. Instead, he calmed his heart and moved the yuan qi in his pores. After circulating the yuan qi in his body's meridians for 36 cycles, he stood up and went outside the straw hut to practice his fist and sword techniques. During the day, there was only Zhang Xiaohua in the herb field. He Tianshu still didn't appear. However, Zhang Xiaohua found that the annoying weeds in the herb field seemed to be less than usual. This made Zhang Xiaohua feel very gratified. Heaven rewards the diligent. This heaven also saw that he was taking care of the herb field by himself and specially let the weeds go away to give him more time to practice martial arts. Involuntarily, Zhang Xiaohua had a trace of anticipation for the upcoming martial arts exhibition. Qigong and footwork should be practiced in the forest. Zhang Xiaohua could only leave the herb field. On the way to the forest, Zhang Xiaohua met Ma Jing and Lu Er. When Ma Jing saw Zhang Xiaohua, he greeted him from afar and ran straight over. He wanted to grab Zhang Xiaohua's hand. At this moment, Zhang Xiaohua was very agile. He immediately moved aside a little and cupped his hands. "Brother Ma, long time no see. How is everything?" Ma Jing's hand was suspended in the air. There was no embarrassment on his face. He immediately cupped his hands and said, "Zhang Xiaohua, how are you?" Then, he winked at him with a look of understanding. He said in a low voice, "Zhang Xiaohua, you're really something. When I saw you go to Captain He's place, I thought you were just lucky. Now I know that you have real talent. Brother really admires you." When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, he was happy and said, "That's right. Isn't this all thanks to Brother Ma's influence? If it wasn't for your help, how could I have grown so quickly?" Ma Jing smiled until his eyes were squinted. He enjoyed it very much. He glanced at Lu Er from the corner of his eyes and said, "This is also inseparable from your talent. Look, this old brother of mine, Lu Er, has been with me for so long. Why is he still not enlightened? Oh right, Zhang Xiaohua, if you have any riches in the future, you must think of us brothers. After all, I lived with you before." When Zhang Xiaohua thought about the past, he couldn't help but have goosebumps. He quickly said, Of course, of course." Ma Jing got a promise and smiled charmingly. "I'll remember this. When you have power, I'll have the capital to show off. Maybe I can also write a book called The Story of Zhang Xiaohua and Me." Zhang Xiaohua was taken aback and quickly advised, "Brother Ma, we've only lived in the same house for such a short period of time. How much can you remember about me? Besides, is there so much content for you to write a book?" Ma Jing waved his hand and said, "Don't worry about that. If I can make money, what can't I write?" Zhang Xiaohua smiled bitterly. Ma Jing cupped his hands and said goodbye to him. "Okay, let's not talk about anything else. You should focus on improving. Everything can wait until you have achievements." Zhang Xiaohua smiled and nodded. "That's right. Brother Ma is right. Everything depends on real talent to achieve success. I'll definitely work hard." Ma Jing smiled and waved his hand to leave. Lu Er, who was beside him, smiled at Zhang Xiaohua and chased after him. But after just 2 steps, Ma Jing turned back and called, "Zhang Xiaohua." Zhang Xiaohua could only stop and turn back to ask, "Brother Ma, is there anything else?" Ma Jing looked at Zhang Xiaohua with great respect and said, "Zhang Xiaohua, your action of building a straw shed in the medicine field was really wonderful. This flattery is really good. It's exactly what our village head wants. Today, the servants who are united around Brother Shi are all talking about you. This big brother is full of admiration. How did you come up with such a wonderful idea? This kind of real talent, this big brother can't even catch up with a horse." Zhang Xiaohua was stunned on the spot. Ma Jing didn't care about Zhang Xiaohua's reaction and turned to leave. As he walked, he muttered, "I have to hurry to the warehouse. Don't let Brother Shi and the others take the lead." Zhang Xiaohua looked at Ma Jing's back as he left. He didn't know what to say. Even if he didn't mean it, the listener would understand. Although he didn't say anything, what he did made people misunderstand a lot. Thinking about how this wasn't the ancient people's heart, then thinking about his second brother's experience in the Misty School, Zhang Xiaohua's heart was in turmoil. However, he suddenly burst out laughing. After today, wouldn't there be a lot of straw sheds next to the medicine field that Ma Jing and the others were in charge of? That scene would be spectacular. But what did this have to do with him? The ancients didn't say that, okay? Walk your own path and let others say what they want. A gentleman should be magnanimous. In any case, he had a clear conscience. How others saw him was their business. In an instant, Zhang Xiaohua seemed to understand Zhang Xiaohua's intentions. There was a distance from the medicine field to the forest, so it was inevitable that he would pass by the small courtyard. In a hurry, many servants came to meet him. They all gave him a thumbs up. Zhang Xiaohua found it funny and didn't say anything. Looking at the direction that those people were heading, they were the same as Ma Jing. It seemed that today's warehouse would be lively. The forest was still so quiet. The moment Zhang Xiaohua stepped in, he immediately felt a sense of peace. He gently pursed his lips and smiled. This was the atmosphere that he liked. In his mind, he recalled the Qigong skills and ethereal steps that He Tianshu had taught him. Zhang Xiaohua took a deep breath and exerted force on his right foot. His body shot forward like an arrow, like a butterfly flying freely in the forest. Please add it to your collection, thank you. Chapter 163. The forest was still the same and there was no one else around. However, Zhang Xiaohua was no longer the Zhang Xiaohua of the past. Once he entered the forest, he felt confident. He steadied himself and took a deep breath. Following He Tianshu's instructions, he practiced Qigong in the gaps of the forest to his heart's content. There were many types of Qigong in the pugilistic world. The simplest was a light body technique that allowed one's body to be nimble and move at superhuman speeds. The more profound ones were specialized breathing methods and internal energy circulation methods. The ethereal steps imparted a person's potential beyond these. At this time, Zhang Xiaohua was already very familiar with the ethereal steps technique and was very proficient in it. Unfortunately, he had never learned Qigong before. Not to mention that there was a profound cultivation method that could match it. He had not even glimpsed the simple qigong technique. What he was practicing now was the simple qigong technique that He Tianshu had taught him last time. He Tianshu's qigong technique was a secret of the ethereal sect and naturally could not be taught to him. He Tianshu did not know if Zhang Xiaohua knew other qigong techniques. In short, he did not teach Zhang Xiaohua any of them. However, with just a little understanding of qigong, Zhang Xiaohua was able to freely shuttle through the forest like a butterfly fluttering among the flowers. His body was incomparably ethereal, giving off an ethereal feeling. It was just that his slightly rough clothes dragged him down to the mundane world. After practicing for a while, Zhang Xiaohua was a little dispirited. What he was practicing was only moving through the gaps of the forest. Although it was swift, it could not leave the ground and could not move about at high altitudes. It was fundamentally different from qigong, so how could it pique his interest? Following that, Zhang Xiaohua familiarized himself with the second level of the Misty School's footwork and stopped. Although the footwork was profound, it was only recently comprehended by He Tianshu. Zhang Xiaohua had just warmed up and had already finished practicing it. There was no further explanation, which made Zhang Xiaohua unable to stop himself. He pondered for a moment before walking out of the forest and towards the small courtyard. As he walked, he wondered how much Captain he had comprehended. He Tianshu's room was half closed. When Zhang Xiaohua poked his head out to take a look, He Tianshu was still in the same position with a piece of paper in his hand, sleeping on the table. The entire room was filled with the smell of oil. Captain, he must have forgotten to eat and sleep again last night. Zhang Xiaohua's eyes darted around. He tiptoed in front of the table and carefully pulled out the few pieces of paper from He Tianshu's hands. But just as Zhang Xiaohua was about to move, he heard He Tianshu's angry roar, "Who is it?" Then, without opening his eyes, He Tianshu turned around and threw a punch at Zhang Xiaohua's face with his left hand. Zhang Xiaohua didn't want to wake He Tianshu up, so he was very careful. That roar scared him, and before he could make a sound, he saw a fist coming from afar. It was getting bigger and bigger, and a strong gust of wind blew towards him. Without thinking, Zhang Xiaohua quickly let go of the pages and stepped back, but the fist was still chasing after him. Zhang Xiaohua had no choice. He moved his feet and dodged He Tianshu's fist. At that moment, Zhang Xiaohua had the chance to shout, "Captain He, it's me." He Tianshu's fist missed. He was about to bend his arm and strike with his elbow when he heard the familiar voice. He quickly stopped and opened his hazy eyes. He said in surprise, "Zhang Xiaohua. Why are you here?" Zhang Xiaohua stood far away and said embarrassedly, "Of course it's me, Captain He." He Tianshu rubbed his eyes and yawned. He said, "When did you come in? Why didn't I hear any footsteps?" Zhang Xiaohua walked up and said with a smile, "You were sleeping soundly, how could you hear me?" He Tianshu frowned and said, "How is that possible? Do you think that all inner force experts are like you, sleeping more deeply than anyone else and not waking up no matter how you call them? When I'm sleeping, I can feel it if someone comes within 3 feet of me." He Tianshu's mouth twitched a few times, and he said embarrassedly, "But, I watched for the entire night and didn't stop in the morning. Maybe I'm too tired." Suddenly, he seemed to have thought of something and asked in surprise, "Oh right, Zhang Xiaohua, you were able to dodge my fist just now. Did you use ethereal steps?" Zhang Xiaohua also seemed to have come to a realization as she said happily, "That's right, Captain He. I think so. When you hit me just now, I was also shocked. I didn't know how I dodged it. Now that I think about it, it must be that ethereal steps." He Tianshu's eyes curved as he said excitedly, "This ethereal steps is indeed worthy of its reputation. With your standard, you were actually able to dodge my fist. no one would dare to believe it. Ha ha ha, I must comprehend this ethereal steps to the end. When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she was also happy. She asked excitedly, Captain He, how much have you comprehended? Hurry up and teach me. Hearing this, He Tianchu's smile froze on his face as he said angrily, Zhang Xiaohua, do you think this is Arhat Fist? This is one of the 3 divine skills of the Misty School. I've already comprehended enough in the past few days. If you want me to completely master it in a few days and teach it to you, that's not very possible. You only know how to eat ready-made food. Why don't you take a look for yourself? How difficult is this footwork? I've been reading it since yesterday and haven't comprehended much. After saying that, he was about to pass the pages in his hand to Zhang Xiaohua. However, halfway through, he retracted it and muttered to himself, I've only just finished reading half of it. I'm not giving it to you. Then, he pointed to a page on the bed and said, that one over there, take a look for yourself. How could Zhang Xiaohua want to read it himself? Having someone teach him was a very blissful thing. He didn't want to do it himself. However, seeing that He Tianshu was a little angry, he could only walk over and take the page in his hand. He pretended to read it and said, all right, Captain He, I'll read it too. Let's read it together. He Tianshu snorted and muttered, that's more like it. Look at my hard work too. Zhang Xiaohua smiled apologetically and said, all right, I'll learn from Captain He. I'll pay my respects to Captain He. The page was filled with dense footprints and some inexplicable numbers were written on it. There were also some tiny words beside it. Zhang Xiaohua was confused. How could he understand it? What should he do? He Tianshu looked at his embarrassed face and was overjoyed. He said, first, look at the words beside it. Then, according to the explanation, look at the footprints. Those footprints are where you need to go and those numbers are the order of your steps. Only then did Zhang Xiaohua understand. He slowly read through it. In the beginning, he couldn't quite understand it, but once he combined it with the footprints, he slowly understood that this page was the 2nd level of the ethereal steps cultivation technique. It was what He Tianshu had just comprehended. As Zhang Xiaohua read, a small figure appeared in his mind. It was practicing the ethereal steps according to the records on the page and Zhang Xiaohua's understanding. By the time Zhang Xiaohua finished reading the page, the figure had also finished demonstrating. It was basically the same as what He Tianshu had taught. There were only a few differences. These differences weren't the footwork but the figure. Zhang Xiaohua didn't know if it was a mistake in his understanding or something else. Hence, Zhang Xiaohua raised his head and asked, Team Leader He Tianshu narrowed his eyes and frowned. It was a crucial moment in his comprehension. When he heard Zhang Xiaohua calling out to him, his brows couldn't help but knit even tighter. He said impatiently, what's the matter? Zhang Xiaohua originally wanted to ask, why is it that what you taught is different from what I saw? But when he saw He Tianshu's expression, it was obvious that he was impatient. He immediately swallowed his words and stammered, this seems to have just been learned. He Tianshu said, just take a look at it. Reviewing the old and learning the new is the true way to learn. Saying that, he took the page from Zhang Xiaohua's hands and looked at it carefully. He thought to himself, I really took the wrong one. This kid can actually understand it. He looked at Zhang Xiaohua with some surprise and took 2 pages from the other end of the table. After looking at it carefully, he handed it to Zhang Xiaohua and said, this is the 3rd level of the cultivation technique. Take a look. Oh right, go back to your room and read it. I want to be alone. Zhang Xiaohua took it and was about to turn around and leave. He Tianshu said with a bit of a smile, if you have any insights, don't forget to tell me. Zhang Xiaohua chuckled and didn't say anything. She closed the door and returned to her room. Behind her, He Tian-shu curled his lips and shook his head. He muttered to himself, "This kid is really impatient. He's not in charge and doesn't know how expensive rice and salt are. This secret manual can be comprehended in a few days. Just take a look and you'll know how difficult it is." After returning to her room, Zhang Xiaohua didn't waste any time. She sat on the Kong bed and started reading the page in her hand. She saw that it was clearly written on the page. It was a method to improve Qigong. Zhang Xiaohua felt a burst of excitement. Wasn't this the Qigong technique that she had been yearning for day and night? It was really a case of wearing out iron shoes in a fruitless search, only to find it by chance without any effort. Suppressing her excitement, Zhang Xiaohua read it carefully. As she compared the pictures, she studied the words. After reading it carefully, Zhang Xiaohua's enthusiasm was doused with a bucket of cold water. The foundation of this Qigong technique was inner force. It was the way to control inner force. Without inner force, learning this Qigong technique was like trying to get a fish out of a tree. Zhang Xiaohua threw the 2 pages on the table in disappointment. She smacked her lips and thought that the core of martial arts was inner force. Qigong needed it. High-level fish techniques needed it. Even sword techniques needed it. It seemed like she had to practice the Carefree Heart Sutra first. When he stood up and picked up the pages, he recalled that the 3rd level of the Ethereal Steps mental cultivation method had 2 pages. He had yet to look at the 2nd page. However, he didn't harbor any hopes. If he couldn't even master the 1st page, how could he possibly master the 2nd page? The 2nd page was also written very clearly. It was the art of levitation. Levitation. Zhang Xiaohua was stunned. What did that mean? Following that, Zhang Xiaohua smacked his forehead and laughed. The previous page talked about Qigong. The 2nd page was obviously about what happened after Qigong. It must be a continuation of the 1st page. However, this Qigong technique didn't allow one to levitate. Zhang Xiaohua didn't know that. Since the footwork technique was written like that, it should be possible. Zhang Xiaohua naturally thought so. However, after Zhang Xiaohua carefully studied it, she realized that her understanding was a little off. This levitation technique wasn't the continuation of Qigong. It was another Qigong technique. It was very different from Qigong. The Qigong technique talked about how to use inner force to circulate through the meridians in the body to achieve the effect of Qigong. Whereas the levitation technique talked about how to release the qi from the meridians. Through the control of releasing the qi, one could achieve the effect of levitation. However, no matter which Qigong technique it was, they all used inner force as the foundation. They were all not related to Zhang Xiaohua. However, no matter how extravagant the explanation in the manual was, no matter how thoroughly Zhang Xiaohua understood it, it was all just an illusion. Zhang Xiaohua then understood what the eldest disciple of the Misty School, Zhang Qingyue, had said when he passed the ethereal steps to her. This ethereal steps didn't have much to do with inner force. The first 2 levels were unrelated and didn't require any inner force. This was the beginning of using inner force for the 3rd level. Presumably, the next few levels of the mental cultivation method would also be driven by inner force. Zhang Xiaohua originally wanted to return these 2 pages to He Tian-shu. However, she thought that he must still be racking his brains to understand the densely packed footwork technique. If she were to go now, wouldn't she be offending him? Moreover, she didn't know any inner force mental cultivation method. Perhaps He Tian-shu wouldn't impart this Qigong technique to her. Although she didn't know it now, it didn't mean that she wouldn't know it in the future. Once she solved the problem of her yuan qi disappearing in her acupuncture points, wouldn't she be able to use her yuan qi? She should take this opportunity to comprehend these two Qigong techniques first. That was the most important thing. Thinking of this, Zhang Xiaohua sat down with peace of mind and concentrated on comprehending. After an entire afternoon, when the sky was about to turn dark, Zhang Xiaohua walked out of his little house. Zhang Xiaohua's face wasn't filled with joy. Instead, it was filled with puzzlement. After an entire afternoon of comprehending, he had basically memorized and comprehended these two techniques. If there was inner force in his body, Zhang Xiaohua had a lot of confidence that he would be able to use these two Qigong techniques. The reason why Zhang Xiaohua didn't understand was that no matter how he comprehended the first Qigong technique in his mind, he couldn't form a clear figure. Although he was very sure that he had really learned it, the second levitation technique was clearly displayed in his mind. Why was this? Since he comprehended the first technique first, Zhang Xiaohua spent more energy on the levitation technique. He comprehended it 3 times. When he was sure that he had learned it, he began to comprehend the second levitation technique. The comprehension of the levitation technique was far beyond Zhang Xiaohua's expectations. Perhaps it was because he had just comprehended the levitation technique, the comprehension of the levitation technique was unusually smooth. Only 2 times, Zhang Xiaohua had finished comprehending it. A clear figure appeared in his mind. Zhang Xiaohua could see how the aura in the meridians was released and how to control it from this figure. At this time, Zhang Xiaohua remembered that the levitation technique hadn't shown the figure yet. So he turned back to look at the levitation technique. But this time, no matter how he comprehended it, the figure of the levitation technique didn't appear. Until the sky was dark, Zhang Xiaohua had no choice but to give up. Maybe he comprehended it wrongly somewhere, Zhang Xiaohua thought. During dinner, Zhang Xiaohua was still full of thoughts. He didn't notice the expressions of respect on the other tables. Moreover, his appetite wasn't very good. When he had just arrived at the villa, he had just finished practicing the fist technique and would eat a lot. Moreover, Zhang Xiaohua was now growing. Every time he ate, he would be the first to arrive and the last to leave. Most of the time, he would be laughed at by the servants. But recently, Zhang Xiaohua obviously didn't eat as much as before. This seemed to be a little abnormal. After all, he was still practicing martial arts very hard. The amount of exercise was also large. He should be able to eat more than before. Perhaps it was haggard because of young Zhang Xiaohua's troubles. Hometown water, nostalgia. The servants at the side whispered and discussed endlessly. They seemed to have found a new topic. Zhang Xiaohua turned a deaf ear to this. He mechanically ate a few mouthfuls of rice and a few chopsticks of food before hurrying out. Only his back was left for others to laugh at. After leaving the small courtyard, Zhang Xiaohua didn't go to the forest. He directly returned to the grass shed in the medicine field. When he passed by the other medicine fields, Zhang Xiaohua paid special attention. It wasn't full of grass sheds as he had imagined. It seemed that the other servants' desire to show off had been cast into the darkness. At night, Zhang Xiaohua was still doing his homework in the grass shed. Just as he was thinking about the circulation of internal energy in his meridians as usual, he suddenly had a new idea. Since he used the method of thinking to learn the Worry-Free Heart Sutra, why not use the method of thinking to practice Qigong? Anyway, he had already learned 2 types of internal energy cultivation methods. Why not think about the circulation of internal energy in his meridians and try Qigong? However, he probably couldn't think about the second type of levitation technique. He didn't have any internal energy. How could he release it and control it? As he thought about it, Zhang Xiaohua fell into a hazy sleep. His body quickly adjusted to a certain frequency. The power of the stars was immediately attracted to him. At the same time, the qi of heaven and earth was also absorbed into his body more effectively. Everything was so harmonious. The next day was a bright and sunny day. Zhang Xiaohua only practiced his fist and sword techniques by the grass shed. Because he needed to water the medicine field, Zhang Xiaohua didn't have much time to practice his idea of qigong from last night. Everything in the medicine field was the same. There were fewer weeds, which reduced Zhang Xiaohua's labor. If it continued at this rate, there might not be any weeds growing in the field in a month or two. Late in the morning, Zhang Xiaohua was watering when he heard someone calling him from the ridge. When he looked up, it was Qiu Tong. Zhang Xiaohua quickly walked over and asked with a smile, "Sister Qiu Tong, why did you suddenly come today? It's so hot today. Don't get tanned." Qiu Tong said, "It's because of you. That's why I came." Zhang Xiaohua asked curiously, "What's the matter, Sister Qiu Tong?" Qiu Tong looked at him and said with a smile, "Take a guess." "You really don't know?" Immediately, Zhang Xiaohua understood. He probed, "Is it about the Misty School's martial arts competition?" Qiu Tong clapped and praised, "That's right, Zhang Xiaohua. It's about that. Misty asked me to tell you that she's already registered you. She'll send someone to inform you when the day comes. Please add it to your collection. Thank you." Chapter 164. Zhang Xiaohua said gratefully, "Big Sister Qiu Tong, you could have waited until you saw me or had someone send me a message for such a small matter. Why did you have to come here personally?" Qiu Tong pursed her lips and smiled, "That's what I was thinking. But your straw hut has been quite famous in the villa these days, so I came to take a look. Perhaps I should also build one in the courtyard so that the young miss will notice me." Zhang Xiaohua was embarrassed and scratched her head, "Big Sister Qiu Tong, you're making fun of me. I built this straw hut just to practice my internal energy. Who knew that it would cause so much trouble and cause so many misunderstandings?" Qiu Tong nodded, "I've already asked the young miss about your intentions. Of course she knows, but others don't. You're so unconventional, so of course you'll attract the attention of others. Especially now that you're doing so well in the villa, those who don't know will pay more attention to you." Zhang Xiaohua was shocked, "No way, Big Sister Qiu Tong. Building a hut will cause so much trouble. Why don't I just tear it down?" Qiu Tong waved her hand, "No need. Your straw hut will only be used until the martial arts exhibition starts. It'll only be used for a few days anyway. Why bother? Moreover, the young miss has already told the people in charge of the warehouse to scold the servants. If you tear it down, the young miss will lose face." Qiu Tong looked around the hut and asked with a smile, "Did you build this hut yourself?" Speaking of her straw hut, Zhang Xiaohua immediately perked up. She puffed out her chest and said proudly, "Yes, Big Sister Qiu Tong. I built it myself." Qiu Tong praised, "It's not bad. I didn't know you had such skills." Zhang Xiaohua was embarrassed when she heard this and said, "It's nothing. When I was at the Guizhuang house, I often helped father and brother build it. They're the ones who built it well." Qiu Tong smiled and asked, "Then how's your internal energy training? Have you found the qi?" Zhang Xiaohua thought for a moment and said, "It's about time. Staying here at night is quite quiet. It's really good for practicing inner strength. I think that when the martial arts exhibition starts, there should be a breakthrough." Qiu Tong nodded and advised him, "Practicing hard is a good thing. Big Sister won't stop you, but you must know when to stop. Don't practice so hard just because you're going to participate in the martial arts exhibition. That's not good." Zhang Xiaohua nodded seriously and said, "I know, Big Sister Qiu Tong. Actually, you know that I can't practice even if I want to." Qiu Tong was stunned for a moment before she understood what he meant. She couldn't help but cover her mouth and laugh. The two of them chatted for a while longer before Chiu Tong took her leave and returned to the inner court. Zhang Xiaohua watched Chiu Tong leave and went back to work. However, before she could water the ground, she heard someone shouting from outside, Zhang Xiaohua, where are you? Zhang Xiaohua was puzzled. What day was it today? Usually, there weren't many people in the medicine field. Recently, there were even fewer people here. However, in just a short while, 2 people had come looking for him. Who was it this time? When he straightened up and took a closer look, it turned out to be his cheap master, He Tianshu. Zhang Xiaohua felt that it was strange. He Tianshu's voice was very familiar to him, but it was clearly unfamiliar just now. Zhang Xiaohua walked to the edge of the field and said with a smile, Captain He, were you the one who called for me? He Tianshu said in a hoarse voice, of course it was me. Is there anyone else nearby? Zhang Xiaohua asked, what happened to your voice? He Tianshu frowned and said, who knows? It was fine yesterday, but this morning it became like this. Zhang Xiaohua looked at He Tianshu's 2 large dark circles and asked, you didn't sleep last night? He Tianshu scratched his head and said, I did. I fell asleep while looking at it. I don't know when I fell asleep. Zhang Xiaohua didn't ask why He Tianshu was looking for him. He first took out the 2 pages of the secret manual and returned it to He Tianshu and said, Captain He, I'll return this to you first. He Tianshu seemed to have known this result. He reached out and took it and said, what? You want to return it to me in one night? Do you know how difficult it is inside? In the future, don't make any sarcastic remarks. Practicing martial arts requires a down-to-earth style. There's nothing good about it. Zhang Xiaohua opened his mouth and wanted to refute something. However, He Tianshu was right. Of course, it was difficult inside. He didn't have any internal energy, so he couldn't practice it. He wanted to refute, but he didn't know what to say. He might as well be silent. He Tianshu saw that Zhang Xiaohua's attitude was humble and didn't say anything. He was very happy and said, you really built a straw shed here. I thought you were joking. That's right, did you get the chi sense from the fierce bull strength? Zhang Xiaohua shook his head. He Tianshu's face was filled with sympathy. He patted Zhang Xiaohua's shoulder and said, don't be in such a hurry. This bull stalking force is the simplest. I believe that you'll gain something if you try to understand it during the night. Then, He Tianshu took out another page from his chest and said, after I worked so hard yesterday, my voice became hoarse. Only then did I learn some footwork. I went to your house to find you, but I didn't know that you had settled down in the medicine field. It seems like you're determined to participate in the martial arts exhibition. Let's go to the forest. I'll teach you what I just learned. I hope that in a month's time, you'll be able to make some progress. Zhang Xiaohua's lips curled into a smile as he executed the footwork in the open space in the forest. The result was exactly as Zhang Xiaohua had guessed. If the 2 steps were reversed, he would be able to execute it smoothly. In an instant, Zhang Xiaohua had reversed the 2 footwork records in his heart. The reversal of the footwork was easier said than done. If He Tianshu was here, he would definitely not do so. It couldn't be said that Zhang Xiaohua was intelligent, or that He Tianshu's thinking was inflexible and inflexible. It was just that the 2 of them had received different education. Ever since Zhang Xiaohua started practicing martial arts, he had always pondered and made his own decisions. The only set of fist of the North Star was also pieced together by him. From the beginning, he had a habit of doubting everything and breaking everything. Whatever moves were suitable for him, he would use them accordingly. He even dared to change the fist techniques that others had practiced for many years, what more this footwork. As for He Tianshu, he had received formal martial arts education in the Misty School since young and was used to the textbook way of thinking. The fame of the Misty School's 3 great divine techniques had long been branded in his mind as a legend. When he saw this ethereal steps, he could only use a devout heart to learn and imitate it. He had never dared to doubt or question the authority of this footwork. Even if it was wrong, he would only conscientiously follow the wrong path and learn and accept it. This couldn't help but be said to be a tragedy of education. Since he had this discovery, Zhang Xiaohua no longer held back. Earlier on, he had learned a few parts that were different from what Tianshu had taught him. This time, he changed them all. Moreover, seeing that it was still early, Zhang Xiaohua didn't return to the herb farm. He wanted to comprehend the remaining second level of the ethereal steps in one go in the forest. Of course, he didn't dare to have extravagant hopes that he would be able to comprehend the ethereal steps that Tianshu had been unable to comprehend for many days in just half a day. But the results were out of Zhang Xiaohua's expectations. Because he already had the experience of comprehending many different fish techniques, as well as comprehending some footwork at the beginning of the second level of the ethereal steps, although there were many footwork at the back, but with the help of Zhang Xiaohua's powerful memory and the figure in his mind, he was able to integrate the remaining footwork into his little basket in an entire afternoon. The entire second level of the footwork had a smooth outline in his mind. But after all, there was a gap between theory and practice. Although he had comprehended it and knew how to practice, it was still difficult for Zhang Xiaohua to execute it step by step. With regards to this result, Zhang Xiaohua was already extremely satisfied. What was the ethereal steps? It was one of the Misty School's 3 great divine techniques. Although the first 3 levels were the foundation of the footwork, it was still incomparably profound. Even with Tianshu's standard, it was still difficult for him to comprehend it. But he was able to comprehend it in just half a day. What else could he say? Now that the footwork was already in his mind, he would be able to slowly master it. Just as Zhang Xiaohua was about to practice again, there was a sudden sound of thunder from afar. A gust of cold wind blew and droplets of rain fell from the sky. Instantly, there were pitter-patter sounds in the forest. It was raining. Zhang Xiaohua extinguished the thought of striking while the iron was hot and quickly ran towards the small courtyard. Halfway there, he thought of the books in the straw hut and had no choice but to run towards the straw hut in the herbal field. By the time he reached the straw hut, the rain was already heavy. Zhang Xiaohua did a quick check and luckily, the quality of his straw hut was still all right. It wasn't a shoddy construction and the rainwater didn't leak in at all. Standing in the straw hut and looking at the pouring rain outside, Zhang Xiaohua gave up on the idea of returning to the hut. He lit up an oil lamp and began to read his book in peace. The raindrops hit the roof of the straw hut and the pitter-patter sounds were incessant. The distant sound of thunder was also incessant and flashes of light could be seen from time to time. With such a night light and the rain hitting the straw hut, Zhang Xiaohua was reading at night. Even if he didn't have a female companion, it still had a unique flavor. At the very least, when the cold wind blew in, it wasn't a chill that an ordinary person could endure. It was getting deeper and deeper, but the rain didn't show any signs of stopping. The sound of the straw hut became denser and there were signs of it getting louder. The distant sound of thunder was also louder and seemed to be getting closer. Zhang Xiaohua closed the book and carefully put it in his arms. He then blew out the oil lamp and sat down cross-legged. It was his daily practice of drawing qi into his body. When Zhang Xiaohua entered a meditative state, he carefully perceived the qi of heaven and earth outside. He was pleased to find that the qi of heaven and earth on this rainy day was actually a bit more than usual and every trace of qi was lively and seemed to have a little more vitality. Zhang Xiaohua had a feeling and a thought emerged in his mind. The qi of heaven and earth was very fresh. But it was this fresh and lively qi of heaven and earth that caused a little difficulty for Zhang Xiaohua to draw qi. The qi of heaven and earth didn't flow from top to bottom like usual. Instead, it flowed around like fish. Zhang Xiaohua's perception couldn't draw them into his body as easily as usual. Therefore, Zhang Xiaohua had to increase the strength of his perception and spread it out like a fishing net. It was true that hard work paid off. Zhang Xiaohua patiently guided the qi of heaven and earth for a period of time and successfully drew a new trace of qi into his body. This trace of qi of heaven and earth was indeed a little different from before. Although Zhang Xiaohua couldn't completely perceive its appearance in his body, he could faintly feel its liveliness and knew that it was in that part of his body. Successfully drawing in the first trace of qi of heaven and earth seemed to have built a bridge between Zhang Xiaohua's body and the outside world. More and more fresh qi of heaven and earth rushed into Zhang Xiaohua's body like moths to a flame and was drawn in endlessly. Just as Zhang Xiaohua happily drew the qi of heaven and earth into his body, the liveliness spread throughout his body. At this time, Zhang Xiaohua's qi of heaven and earth became even easier. He silently recited the Heart Sutra's cultivation method, and this liveliness flowed along the meridians of his previous qi of heaven and earth. Very quickly, it went through a cycle and more qi of heaven and earth was drawn in and added to this invisible stream. At this time, an accident happened. There was a loud sound. Kacha, a thunderous sound smashed right above Zhang Xiaohua's sturdy straw hut. Chapter 165. The moment the thunder roared, Zhang Xiaohua was enjoying the fruits of his labor, methodically drawing and refining qi. His perception was still outside his body. Although the thunder was high up in the sky, it still smashed into his perception that was drawing qi. Immediately, Zhang Xiaohua felt as if a hammer had smashed into his heart. He was extremely depressed. There was a sweet taste in his throat and a mouthful of blood surged up. Zhang Xiaohua could not help but open his mouth and spit out a small mouthful of blood. His breathing rate of 9 shallow and 1 deep was immediately interrupted. At this moment, the lively qi from the outside world was flowing into Zhang Xiaohua's body in an orderly manner. After the thunder, the pure qi of heaven and earth suddenly increased by more than 10 times. These qi also rushed towards Zhang Xiaohua. Although the yuan qi that appeared later was pure, it was different from the yuan qi that Zhang Xiaohua had drawn in previously. The yuan qi from before was lively like a lively child, a little mischievous and playful. However, the yuan qi that suddenly appeared was not only purer than the yuan qi from before, but the most different thing was that this yuan qi was no longer just lively. It was liveliness within liveliness. It could even be said that it was tyrannical. It was like a drunken brute or a young man with nowhere to vent his energy. It disorderly rushed into the yuan qi that had lined up to enter Zhang Xiaohua's body. These disorderly, large amounts of qi immediately caused the qi outside Zhang Xiaohua's body to churn. It was like a gurgling stream just now, but in an instant, it became a monstrous wave, drowning Zhang Xiaohua in it. Countless violent qi swarmed into Zhang Xiaohua's pores. Previously, Zhang Xiaohua was still complaining about not being able to feel the qi in his body, but now, he really felt the taste of the qi rushing into his body. As Zhang Xiaohua's body was still circulating, the huge amount of qi immediately rushed into his meridians. But these qi exceeded Zhang Xiaohua's expectations. Caught off guard, he immediately lost control of these qi. The violent qi immediately rushed into Zhang Xiaohua's meridians like a flood. Zhang Xiaohua immediately felt a heart-wrenching pain coming from his body. His calm state of mind instantly collapsed. At this moment, the blood that he spat out had just landed on the ground. Zhang Xiaohua was flustered. Could it be that this was qi deviation? Zhang Xiaohua, who had never experienced such a situation, was helpless and did not know what to do. However, the pain in his body continued to spread and would not stop just because of Zhang Xiaohua's ignorance. Moreover, when it rains, it pours. There was another burst of rumbling thunder above his head. An even larger amount of violent qi continued to flow into Zhang Xiaohua's body through the previously established qi channel. Zhang Xiaohua felt like he was drowning. The endless qi of heaven and earth oppressed him, like waves hitting him, making him unable to breathe and unable to lift his head. As a result, Zhang Xiaohua blissfully lost consciousness. Before losing consciousness, Zhang Xiaohua's only thought was, "Why is my luck so bad? I just found the qi, and now I'm possessed." In fact, Zhang Xiaohua's loss of consciousness was not because of qi deviation, but because it was now midnight. Our Zhang Xiaohua had fallen asleep on time. At the same time that Zhang Xiaohua fell asleep, he had just stopped his 9 shallow and 1 deep breathing, but immediately began to breathe again. The flickering in his dream guided his body, slowly adjusting to the frequency of the flickering. In an instant, the endless star power in the night sky poured into Zhang Xiaohua's body. Although the star power was thin, but it was orderly. Very quickly, it poured into Zhang Xiaohua's pores, forming a thin layer of star power around him, preventing the qi of the outside world from madly pouring in. At the same time, Zhang Xiaohua's body, under the guidance of the flickering, formed a frequency that was difficult to discern with the naked eye. In addition, the rampaging qi in Zhang Xiaohua's body, under the condition of losing control, had already circulated through the existing meridians, destroying the meridians. At this time, the integration of the star power from the outside world just wrapped around the rampaging qi. The frequency of the star power was the same as the frequency of Zhang Xiaohua's body. Under this frequency, the thin layer of star power on the outer layer of the qi once again circulated along the damaged meridians. This was a wonderful situation occurred. The thin layer of star power seemed to be full of vitality, flowing along the damaged meridians. Traces of star power merged into it, constantly repairing it. Moreover, the meridians had just been damaged by the rampaging qi, and had expanded by a lot. Now that the star power had repaired it, Zhang Xiaohua's meridians had more than doubled in size. The qi wrapped in the star power did not stop rampaging, still trying to break through the shackles of the star power. But under the flickering and the frequency of the star power, the qi was gradually assimilated. The rampaging qi in the qi was gradually extracted and separated, becoming a vital component. In the process of flowing through the meridians, it passed through the shackles of the star power, merged into the meridians, merged into the flesh, merged into the bones, and even merged into Zhang Xiaohua's head. At the same time, the rain outside the straw hut was getting heavier, and the thunder was also incessant. Zhang Xiaohua's body, because of the damaged meridians and the influx of star power, did not cut off the flow of qi into the outside world. On the contrary, under this special frequency, Zhang Xiaohua's pores were like bottomless black holes, attracting endless rampaging qi. At this time, Zhang Xiaohua's surroundings were surrounded by endless qi of heaven and earth. If Zhang Xiaohua was awake, she would know that the qi of heaven and earth described in the Carefree Heart Sutra was exactly like this, with only a slight difference. The difference was that the qi of heaven and earth was overly active now. Although Zhang Xiaohua was already asleep, his breathing, his frequency, and the mantra he was using were all guiding the qi of heaven and earth into his body. But what was different from before was that the thin layer of star power formed a protective membrane around his body. The rampaging qi passed through this layer of star power and was immediately divided into 2 parts. One part was the pure qi that Zhang Xiaohua normally drew into his body, and the other part was the mysterious vital energy that the star power had extracted from the qi. The qi was wrapped by the star power and constantly rushed into Zhang Xiaohua's meridians, while the mysterious vital energy attached to the star power also rushed into the meridians. As it merged into the meridians, it also merged into Zhang Xiaohua's body. The meridians repaired by the star power were originally nourishing, but after the vital energy merged into the meridians, it was as if a catalyst had been added. Not only did the speed of repair increase, the meridians were also filled with vital energy. Just like a young person, the meridians became more resilient and elastic. Moreover, this mysterious vital energy also merged into Zhang Xiaohua's bones that had been tempered by the Big Dipper magical fist along with the circulation of the vital energy. Drops of vital energy seeped into the 108 bones evenly. The pure white bones became even whiter as the vital energy merged into them. Gradually, they became like jade. However, more and more of the mysterious vital energy continued to move upward under the flickering coal. It gathered in Zhang Xiaohua's brain and entered a mysterious place. Other than the circulation of the mysterious vital energy, the qi wrapped by the star power was the same as before. It flowed in the meridians that were gradually recovering and was slowly being tempered. It was the same for the star power. Not long after, a cycle was completed. The qi of heaven and the star power were much more condensed and flowed into the middle dantian. After that, more rampaging qi of heaven and earth and the star power flowed in again and started a new round of tempering. After an unknown amount of time had passed, the rain was still pouring down, and the sound of thunder, however, had stopped. Zhang Xiaohua was still sitting there cross-legged and tempering the qi of heaven and earth. The boundless qi of heaven and earth was becoming less and less. Some of it was absorbed into Zhang Xiaohua's body, but most of it dissipated between heaven and earth. It was not until dawn that the rain stopped and the qi of heaven and earth returned to its original state. There were only traces of qi of heaven and earth floating above the herb field. In the distance, a ray of light rose and supported the sun. Zhang Xiaohua opened her eyes. After the rain, the air in the herb field was exceptionally fresh. After the rain, the herbs in the herb field were also abnormally energetic. In the eyes of Zhang Xiaohua, there was only a feeling of vitality. At this time, Zhang Xiaohua had already remembered the danger last night. He quickly stood up and moved his hands and feet. Fortunately, he was not paralyzed and his hands and feet listened to his commands. He was about to sit down cross-legged and use the Heart Sutra to check his meridians when he suddenly felt that his body was sticky and uncomfortable. Upon closer inspection, he discovered that there was a thin layer of black mud on his body and there were traces of blood in it. He brought his arm to his nose and there was a nauseating stench in blood. Zhang Xiaohua did not know what happened after he fell asleep last night. When he looked carefully on the ground, he discovered that the blood he spat out last night had already dried up. Zhang Xiaohua frowned and thought for a moment. He could not remember anything and hurriedly walked out of the straw hut. Before he left, he even used his feet to rub some dirt to cover up the blood. It was useless to think about anything now. It was better to take care of his personal hygiene first. Fortunately, it was still early in the morning due to the heavy rain last night. There was no one in the small courtyard. After Zhang Xiaohua had washed up and returned to his own hut, he heard the sounds of someone else moving around in the small courtyard. The heavy rain had just stopped in the morning and the ground outside was filled with mud. Zhang Xiaohua temporarily stopped his morning exercise and took out the few thin pages of the Ethereal Steps manual. Fortunately, there was no damage. Zhang Xiaohua carefully placed them on the study table before he had the time to sit cross-legged on the Kong bed. Just as he was about to circulate his qi, Zhang Xiaohua raised his head to look out of the window with lingering fear. The day was already clear and the sky was clear. The sun in the distance had already jumped out, slowly spreading its heat. Zhang Xiaohua was relieved. The pain of qi deviation, he was really afraid. Therefore, Zhang Xiaohua did not dare to easily release his perception. Instead, he silently chanted the incantation of the Carefree Heart Sutra, trying to recall the formless inner energy in his body. This time, he almost caused Zhang Xiaohua to lose his realm. Originally, it was just an illusion and he was unable to sense the inner energy in his meridians. But now, with a slight increase in his chi, he immediately felt the thin strand of chi in his meridians. This was the inner energy that he Tianshu and the rest had mentioned. Zhang Xiaohua was once again overjoyed. He was not dreaming, right? If not for the fact that he was concentrating on circulating his qi, Zhang Xiaohua would have tried biting his own finger. However, that wisp of cool gas flowed smoothly through his meridians like mercury, truly carefree. There was also a slight swelling pain, all of which reminded him that this was not a dream, but a reality that truly existed. Zhang Xiaohua faced this situation and did not know what to say. The danger last night was still vivid in his mind. And when he woke up, he felt qi. This was also true. Then, something must have happened last night that he did not know about. But what was it? No one could tell Zhang Xiaohua. However, since it was a good thing and not a bad thing, he could not find someone to get to the bottom of it. He could only be a taciturn gourd and accept the fruits of victory. A good thing was always better than a bad thing. If he woke up early in the morning and found that he could not move his hands and feet, wouldn't that be 10,000 times more tragic than now? At that time, Zhang Xiaohua would be the one who wanted to cry but had no tears. Why should he be distressed now? Moreover, if he closed his eyes, he would never wake up again. Zhang Xiaohua gave up on finding the reason. He circulated his qi and drove the inner energy to circulate through his meridians. This feeling was really different from reality. Zhang Xiaohua found it very refreshing. It was really fun to have this thing in his body. Zhang Xiaohua had a playful attitude and circulated the Carefree Heart Sutra's inner energy through his meridians for 36 circulations. When he finished, he was about to get up when his heart suddenly moved. He circulated his qi and released his perception to guide the inner energy. When he carefully sensed the outside world, he found that the qi of heaven and earth that had swarmed in last night had already disappeared without a trace. All that was left was a blank space. His perception could not guide the slightest bit of qi of heaven and earth. Zhang Xiaohua could not help but frown. Suddenly, Zhang Xiaohua's perception seemed to have sensed something as it retreated like the tide. At this moment, there was a knock on the door of Zhang Xiaohua's room. Zhang Xiaohua quickly jumped down from the Kong bed and walked to the door as he asked, "Who is it?" "It's me." It was He Tianchu's voice. Zhang Xiaohua quickly opened the door and asked with a smile, "Captain He, why are you up so early today?" He Tianshu entered the room and said, "It's still early. I woke up a long time ago. I knew you were sleeping like a log, so I didn't come early." Zhang Xiaohua was stunned. He looked at the sky outside. It was still early. He Tianshu did not beat around the bush. He stretched out his hand and said, "Give it to me." Zhang Xiaohua was stunned again. He asked curiously, "What is it?" "I'll give it to you." He Tianshu said in a bad mood, "It's the Ethereal Steps Manual. Hurry up and give it to me. After I gave it to you yesterday, I didn't sleep well. I was afraid that something would happen to you if I left it there. Last night, there was heavy rain and thunder, making me anxious. I was afraid that you would sleep in that straw shed again. If you wet this manual, what would I do?" Zhang Xiaohua finally understood. She quickly walked to the desk and returned the few pages to He Tianshu. He Tianshu hurriedly took them and looked at them carefully. After confirming that there were no mistakes, he carefully kept them. After keeping them, He Tianshu seemed to heave a sigh of relief. He said, "Luckily you didn't sleep in the straw shed last night. Let's not talk about how a straw shed can shelter you from the wind and rain. If you caught a cold or had a fever, it would be a small matter. The main point is that the thunder last night was too strange. It struck right above our heads. You don't know, Zhang Xiaohua. For those of us who practice inner strength, it is taboo to practice inner strength on a rainy day. The sound of thunder is usually very abrupt. It interferes with the flow of inner strength. If we are not careful, our qi will go astray and it will be impossible to make up for it. Furthermore, practicing inner strength requires the harmony of one's qi. Think about it, isn't that thunder the nemesis of meditation? It is very easy to lose one's mind. Furthermore, last night's thunder struck right above our heads. It made my little heart beat wildly last night. However, it's fine that you didn't go to the straw shed last night. With the way you sleep, even if the thunder struck right above your head, you probably wouldn't know. He Tianshu looked at Zhang Xiaohua and did not forget to add, furthermore, you have yet to sense qi. There is no inner strength in your meridians. I believe that the sudden thunder will not be able to do anything to you. That's right, have you seen the footwork? Isn't it rare? I think it's better for me to look at it first. It's pointless for you to look at it. Zhang Xiaohua smiled bitterly. Why was this He Tianshu giving advice in hindsight? If he had told him this yesterday, he wouldn't have foolishly run to the straw shed to be frozen. Even if he was frozen, he wouldn't have foolishly tried to draw any qi. Now that he thought about it, this kind of action was like the god of longevity eating arsenic. He was simply tired of living. He was just short of this warning. Last night, he almost closed his eyes and passed away just like that. He Tianshu saw that Zhang Xiaohua was silent and thought that he had received a blow from looking at the ethereal steps yesterday. He patted his shoulder and said, "It's all right, Zhang Xiaohua. I feel that you still have some talent in this footwork. Although you haven't understood the second level of the footwork yet, it's fine. Once I understand it, I will teach you. Don't worry, it won't affect your participation in the martial arts exhibition. After all, I also need," at this point, He Tianshu didn't continue. When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, he hurriedly said, "That's not it, Captain He. I've carefully looked at this footwork, I feel that," He Tianshu waved his hand and stopped him from continuing, saying, I feel that it's quite profound and hard to understand. You should know that this footwork is a secret of our Misty School. If it wasn't difficult, would it be called that? As long as we have the time, we can grind an iron pestle into a needle. I think that as long as we put our efforts into it, we will definitely be able to learn it. Isn't it just the first 3 levels of the basics?" Zhang Xiaohua could only nod. He Tianshu saw that Zhang Xiaohua admitted his mistake and didn't stay any longer. He said, "I won't talk to you anymore. Time is precious. Seeing that the martial arts exhibition is getting closer and closer, I need to seize the time to comprehend the footwork. In a while, if you have nothing to do, go to the medicine field and walk around. I'll leave the matter of the herbs to you. When the martial arts exhibition is over, I'll have Nie Xiao'er and the others properly thank you." When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she was amused and said, "How about having them teach me martial arts?" When He Tianshu heard this, his face turned bitter, but he immediately thought that it would be better to die than to die. He immediately changed his smile and said, "Okay, I'll promise you on their behalf. When they come back, each of them will teach you a set of fish techniques. How about it?" Zhang Xiaohua thought for a moment and said, "I can't learn any fish techniques. It's better to teach me some common sword techniques or blade techniques in the Jianghu." He Tianshu smiled craftily and said, "Okay, I'll let them teach you personally." The word "them" was especially clear. Chapter 166. For the entire morning, Zhang Xiaohua spent his time in the herbal field. After the rain, the field was rather muddy and it was very strenuous to work. Furthermore, the weeds in the herbal field were growing crazily. Zhang Xiaohua was so busy that he could not help but wonder why the weeds that he had seen a few days ago had suddenly grown so much today. By the time he finished his work, it was already close to noon. The sun was high up in the sky, but the ground was still wet and slippery. Zhang Xiaohua did not have a suitable place to practice martial arts, so he could only sit in the straw hut and practice the Carefree Heart Sutra. The cool strands of qi flowed through Zhang Xiaohua's meridians, making him feel very comfortable. When dusk fell, Zhang Xiaohua walked out of the straw hut. After a day of exposure to the sun, some parts of the ground were already dry. Zhang Xiaohua could not wait to practice the Big Dipper mystical fist to loosen up his muscles and bones. In fact, people had a habit of doing certain things. If they did not do it for a day, they would feel empty in their hearts and would not be able to adapt. At this moment, Zhang Xiaohua was like that. It was not bad to say that he was diligent, but practicing martial arts every day had already become a habit. If he did not practice for a day, his bones would probably itch. The clean land beside the straw hut was not too big, but it was enough for Zhang Xiaohua to practice his martial arts. After practicing the Big Dipper mystical fist a few times, Zhang Xiaohua realized that he had advanced. The Big Dipper mystical fist had actually entered the 3rd level. When he practiced it for the 7th time, a cool flow appeared, tempering his bones. Furthermore, Zhang Xiaohua could clearly feel that the cool flow was not the same as the cool qi in his meridians. However, he could not pinpoint the exact difference. In just a few days, the Big Dipper mystical fist was able to level up. This made Xiaohua very happy, but when he thought about it carefully, he realized that he had no idea how to level it up. Even Xiaohua himself was at a loss. All he could do was blindly practice his fist technique and look forward to the next level up. In the next few days, Zhang Xiaohua's life returned to normal. The weeds in the herbal field slowly decreased. He Tianshu didn't disturb Zhang Xiaohua either. He must be immersed in comprehending the ethereal steps. As for Zhang Xiaohua's footwork, after practicing in the forest for the next few days, she had already converted the theory in her mind into the reality of her feet. She had completely grasped the 2nd level of the ethereal steps. However, when she was comprehending it, there were some discrepancies with what was recorded in the secret manual. And when she practiced, there were even more discrepancies. However, it was still roughly similar to what was recorded in the manual. Other than continuously comprehending the footwork, Zhang Xiaohua really didn't have much to prepare. He had practiced the Big Dipper mystical fist countless times. The moves were all engraved in his mind. Ever since he returned to the Huanxi Manor, although he had not sparred with anyone, he was still very confident that he would not be at a disadvantage in terms of fist techniques. As for the sword in old Professor Yu's left hand, he was still practicing. He liked the feeling of the warm flow flowing through his left arm. However, he also knew that no matter how much he practiced this sword move, it would not be able to be used in the martial arts competition. Therefore, he could only use the Big Dipper mystical fist. After learning the footwork of the ethereal steps, Zhang Xiaohua also tried to combine the Big Dipper mystical fist with the ethereal steps. However, after practicing alone for a while, he realized that the ethereal steps was just a type of footwork. One could practice it alone, and even use it in a competition. However, if one practiced the footwork and the fist technique at the same time, it would be very uncoordinated. It was as if one had to twist 2 different things together. Zhang Xiaohua gave it a try and gave up. Therefore, every day, other than practicing the Big Dipper mystical fist, Zhang Xiaohua put all his energy into the cultivation of the Carefree Heart Sutra. After a few days of cultivation, the inner energy in Zhang Xiaohua's meridians was still as thin as silk. There was no obvious growth. When he drew in the Yuan Qi into his body, the Yuan Qi was still nowhere to be seen. However, Zhang Xiaohua was not worried. He probably knew that the yuan qi he was drawing in was too thin. He could not feel it once it entered his body. The inner energy that flowed in his body without any sluggishness was probably because it was constantly drawing in the invisible yuan qi. However, the growth of his cultivation was too slow. He really did not know when he would be able to reach the second level of the Heart Sutra. Zhang Xiaohua, who was in the midst of cultivation, would occasionally lose his anchor. He could not help but smack his lips and shake his head helplessly. After more than 10 days, He Tianshu still did not appear. Zhang Xiaohua, who was quietly cultivating, started to feel anxious. Could it be that He Tianshu had not fully comprehended the ethereal steps? However, he immediately thought of a problem. Why was he waiting for He Tianshu? Did he want him to teach him the second level of the ethereal steps? But he had already learned the second level of the ethereal steps. Did he still need him to teach him? When Zhang Xiaohua thought of this, he could not help but cover his forehead with his hand and frown deeply. He was used to relying on others and had fallen into a vicious cycle of thinking. Even if he had already learned a martial art, he still needed to consult others to confirm if he had learned it correctly. To put it bluntly, it was to obtain the affirmation of others and give himself an affirmation in his heart. Seeing others say that he had learned it correctly, he should not doubt himself anymore. This kind of method had a certain degree of accuracy. There was a saying, when 3 people walk together, there is always one who can learn from me. One could learn from others' strong points to make up for one's weak points. But in terms of the ethereal steps, this was also the first time He Tianshu had learned it. He was also in the stage of comprehending it. Furthermore, the things he had comprehended were already different from the records in the secret manual. If He Tianshu's teaching was different from his own comprehension, then where should he go from here? Hence, Zhang Xiaohua had no choice but to stop the cultivation of the Heart Sutra and begin to consider this problem. Fortunately, it did not take long before his frown relaxed. In fact, it was simple. Even if He Tianshu were to teach Zhang Xiaohua the ethereal steps, Zhang Xiaohua himself would not change what he had already comprehended. Just like the Fist of the North Star, many of the moves were already different from the ones circulating in the pugilistic world. He would not change his habits and change what belonged to him just because of imitating. Furthermore, Zhang Xiaohua also knew deeply that there was one thing he was very sure of. The Fist of the North Star had the effect of tempering the bones. Did other fist techniques have the same effect? If he only pursued learning, would he be in such a situation? There was originally no path in the world. When many people walked on it, there would be a path. Perhaps on other people's path, there would be many people walking on it, and there would be no path in front of him. But when he walked forward, there would be a path. Perhaps what he left behind would only be footprints, but in the eyes of others, it would be a sign. When others had walked on it many times, his direction would naturally become a path. Thinking of this, Zhang Xiaohua seemed to have relaxed a lot. His entire spirit was glowing, as though he had matured a lot. In fact, learning without thinking was a waste. In the past, Zhang Xiaohua only focused on learning. He always felt that his aptitude was inferior to others, and that he had to look up to everyone. Hence, he always buried his head. But during this period of accumulation, it gave him a platform to raise his head. This moment of stagnation, without cultivating, and just thinking, was the starting point of his accumulation. It was a turning point from quantitative change to qualitative change. It would have a profound impact on Zhang Xiaohua's future path. Since he had let go of the mentality of begging others, Zhang Xiaohua immediately considered the third level of ethereal steps. That was the true Qing Gong. This was the martial art that Zhang Xiaohua yearned for even in his dreams. Just thinking about it made him addicted. A person could freely jump in the forest, no longer having to use his feet to measure the ground step by step. It was as though the entire world belonged to him. At the very least, once he mastered Qin Gong, if he wanted to return to the Guozhuang house, he would no longer need to take the horse carriage. Wouldn't that save him a lot of money? Thinking about it, Zhang Xiaohua couldn't wait to rush into the forest to practice Qin Gong. But just as he got up, his heart trembled and he felt ashamed. Just now, he was thinking deeply about taking a path that no one had taken before. But this path wasn't easy to take. He had to take one step at a time before he could see the end. If he was always so careless and lost his composure, he might end up breaking down the moment he took the first step. Thus, Zhang Xiaohua returned to the straw hut and sat down cross-legged. He calmed his heart and cultivated the Heart Sutra. Only then did he pick up the Qin Gong technique from his memories. Although Zhang Xiaohua didn't have an image of the Qin Gong technique recorded in the ethereal steps, he still remembered the incantation clearly. He meditated according to the incantation and pondered over it bit by bit until he was sure that he didn't miss anything. Only then did he get up and come to the forest. However, the results of the practice were both beyond his expectations and within his expectations. Zhang Xiaohua couldn't even master the first step of the levitation technique. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't make the inner energy flow through his meridians like what was mentioned in the ethereal steps, producing the levitation technique. The reason why it was out of his expectations was because he thought that inner energy was the foundation of Qin Gong. As long as he had inner energy, as long as he followed the instructions of the cultivation technique, he would be able to use Qin Gong by moving his inner energy. However, reality told him a cruel truth. Any imagination was just an illusion. Only practice was the way to go. The reason why it wasn't out of his expectations was because all the martial arts that he had learned were basically not done in one go. Unless it was a bumpy road, experiencing different twists and turns. If this Qin Gong was successfully practiced smoothly, then Zhang Xiaohua would really doubt his own noble character. Zhang Xiaohua, who had failed in practicing Qin Gong, walked out of the forest. He couldn't help but naturally thought of He Tianshu. Although he had already decided on his own path, but looking at how others were walking, he could learn from them. He. Moreover, it had been a long time since he had received guidance from this cheap master of his. Zhang Xiaohua really wanted to hear his opinion. As Zhang Xiaohua convinced himself in his heart, he walked towards the small courtyard. It was a pity that He Tianshu wasn't in the house. Zhang Xiaohua, who had humbly asked for guidance, hit a wall. He could only resentfully return to his straw hut and meditate to practice. When he saw He Tianshu, it was already the afternoon of the second day. Sitting in front of Zhang Xiaohua, He Tianshu's face was glowing. He was very spirited and didn't have the dispirited look of staying up late to comprehend the footwork. Zhang Xiaohua was very surprised. Could it be that this footwork had a great nourishing effect after comprehending it to perfection? After asking in detail, they found out that He Tianshu had yet to fully comprehend the second level of the ethereal steps. However, he had recently returned to the pharmacy hall. Just by relying on the portion of the cultivation method that he had comprehended, he had easily defeated someone that he had never been able to defeat in the past. That scene had shocked everyone in the pharmacy hall. Those who had originally wanted to watch the show immediately changed their allegiance and tried to worm their way into being friends with him, wanting to know the reason behind it. This allowed He Tianshu, who had always been disliked in the pharmacy hall, to let out a huge sigh of relief. It was a pity that he wouldn't dare to tell anyone about ethereal steps even if he was beaten to death. Only when he returned could he share the joy with Zhang Xiaohua. Seeing He Tianshu's smug and satisfied look because of a victory, Zhang Xiaohua felt a little sad. The pugilistic world had always been the theme of the strong preying on the weak. It was the same in the Misty School. If one didn't have strong strength, they would be bullied no matter where they went. After Tianshu had vividly described what had happened in the pharmacy hall, Zhang Xiaohua also smiled and asked about Qigong. When Tianshu heard Zhang Xiaohua mention Qigong, he was very puzzled and asked, "Why did you suddenly think of Qigong? You have stayed in the straw hut for quite some time. Have you gained a sense of qi?" Zhang Xiaohua nodded and said, "I have gained a sense of qi, but..." Without waiting for Zhang Xiaohua to finish speaking, Tianshu clapped his hands and praised, "Good, Zhang Xiaohua, you are really not bad. I thought that it would be difficult for you to make any progress in terms of internal strength. Now that you have relied on the reckless bull strength, you have actually gained a sense of qi. This cultivation technique really has its merits." When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she wanted to correct him, but when she opened her mouth, she didn't say it out loud. Tianshu didn't notice Zhang Xiaohua's expression and continued, "However, if you want to practice Qigong just because you have a sense of qi, it is still too early. I remember that when I was young, I also practiced internal strength for 2 years before I started practicing Qigong. You have to first consolidate your sense of qi and cultivate your internal strength to a certain level before you can use your internal strength and use Qigong." When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she probed, "Then Captain He, how long have you been practicing Qigong?" Tianshu said without hesitation, 1 year. I remember very clearly that it was an entire year. It can be considered average. However, although the Qigong that we practice is a secret of the Misty School, our Misty School has a lot of Qigong techniques and that can be considered average. Zhang Xiaohua was dumbfounded and said, "That long?" "Yes, why? How long did you think it would take?" "1 day. Half a year." Tianshu found it a little funny. He continued, "Qigong is a technique of using internal strength. It doesn't need the internal strength of a fish technique. The meridians of those fish techniques are fixed. As long as you follow the moves of the fish technique and send your internal strength to the place according to the meridians, it will be fine." "Fish techniques have their own meridians?" Zhang Xiaohua asked in surprise. "That's right." Tianshu explained, "Many of the internal fish techniques are also internal force cultivation methods. Every move needs to be complemented by specialized internal force. Of course, there are many fish techniques that aren't. However, the power of these fish techniques is small. Moreover, the latter is something that most people can practice. The former is a secret of many sections." Zhang Xiaohua fell into deep thought. Seeing that her Big Dipper magical fist couldn't use internal strength, it must be because of this. She didn't know if the Big Dipper magical fist could be of help when she reached the 9th level. Following that, Tianshu asked again, "Why are you asking about Qigong? Did your second brother find an internal strength cultivation method for you?" Zhang Xiaohua was stunned and asked, "Captain He, have you seen all 3 levels of ethereal steps?" Tianshu was puzzled, "I just saw the 2nd level." "Why? Is there a problem?" Zhang Xiaohua didn't know whether to laugh or cry and said, "You should take a good look at the 3rd level. You will know when you see it." When Tianshu heard that, he carefully took out the movement technique from his chest and picked out the 3rd level cultivation method that he didn't look at. The 3rd level cultivation method only had 2 pages. Just the first page, Tianshu looked at it for a long time. The more he looked, the more excited he became. His eyes were shining. Zhang Xiaohua was very puzzled. Could it be that this cultivation method was very powerful? She didn't seem to feel it. After a long while, Tianshu reluctantly moved his gaze away from the first page and looked at the 2nd secret manual. This time, it was different from the first page. When Tianshu saw the first line, his expression changed greatly. He immediately stood up from his chair and muttered, "How is this possible? How is this possible?" After that, he read 10 lines at a time. The contents of the 2 pages were about the same. He Tianshu took a long time to read the first page, while the second page was finished in a short while. After He Tianshu finished reading, he sat back in his chair and closed his eyes to think. After a long time, he opened his eyes and looked at Zhang Xiaohua tiredly. He asked, Zhang Xiaohua, have you seen the qigong recorded on these 2 pages? Zhang Xiaohua nodded and said, yes, Captain He. The last time I brought it over, I saw it. But when I practiced the first page, I couldn't control my internal energy. He Tianshu smiled and said, you are biting off more than you can chew. You have just gained the qi sense. Where would you get the internal energy to drive it? Then, he waved the manual in his hand and said, Zhang Xiaohua, I really have to thank you. I only had the opportunity to learn such a profound qigong because of you. I owe you a favor. Zhang Xiaohua was shocked when he heard that. He waved his hand and said, Captain He, please don't say that. You spent so much effort to teach me the fish technique, and I haven't thanked you yet. Besides, you've made a great contribution in saving the Manor Lord, so you should thank Leader O. He Tianshu smiled and said, I know what to do with my own affairs. Forget it, I won't be so polite with you. I will remember your matter in my heart. Didn't I just say that the qigong I practiced was the foundation of our Misty school? Almost everyone has to practice it. Do you know the value of this qigong? Zhang Xiaohua shook her head and thought to herself, it seems like it's nothing. He Tianshu said with a smile, the pros and cons of different qigong mainly depend on the efficiency of the usage of internal energy and the development of the qigong. This ethereal steps qigong can be said to be the best of our ethereal sex qigong techniques. It can't be mentioned in the same breath as what I cultivated in the past. With this qigong, not only can it raise my current qigong to a higher level, but with the cultivation of my internal energy, this qigong will have more potential to be unearthed. The quality of this qigong can be the key to winning or losing a competition. It can even affect one's life. Zhang Xiaohua was stunned and said, it's that serious. Chapter 167. He Tianshu smiled and said, what do you know? Qigong is the most basic skill to protect one's life. Many people who roam the pugilistic world, even if their other martial arts aren't that good, they still have to train their qigong well. Think about it. If you encounter a fight and your martial arts aren't as good as others, then wouldn't you still have to run away? Those with good qigong will definitely be able to escape faster. What's more, those with good qigong will be able to gain the upper hand in a fight. Zhang Xiaohua suddenly understood. He didn't have the experience of fighting with his life on the line, nor did he have the experience of roaming the pugilistic world. Naturally, he didn't know the importance of qigong. Zhang Xiaohua thought for a moment and asked, Captain He, then these 2 qigong? Yi Tianshu waved his hand to stop Zhang Xiaohua's question and said, Zhang Xiaohua, although this ethereal steps has 2 qigong cultivation methods, but to be honest, the first one is a true top-grade qigong cultivation method while the second one is an extremely precious trash. Zhang Xiaohua opened her mouth wide and said, oh. What's going on? Precious trash. He Tianshu smiled and said, the first cultivation method is a real martial arts method. I can understand it too. If I concentrate on cultivating it, after a few months or even a year, I think I will definitely be able to grasp it. At that time, I can also teach it to you properly. As for the second one, how should I put it? What it says is simply an unimaginable idea. This kind of qigong cultivation method actually requires the release of qi to form a circulation outside the body. This is simply impossible. Zhang Xiaohua didn't understand and asked, what is qi? He Tianshu explained, it's the kind of hot gas produced in your meridians when you practice internal strength. We call it true qi. Oh. So that's how it is. Zhang Xiaohua understood and said, I thought it was called inner strength. He Tianshu said, true qi, internal force, and internal force have the same meaning. When true qi reaches the attacking fist, the power released is internal force. This kind of power is different from pure strength. It is also called internal force. In fact, it is usually called a mix. There is not much difference. However, how did this qi name come about? It's quite strange. When we were young, we discussed it in detail. Zhang Xiaohua saw that He Tianshu was going off topic and quickly asked, then why can't qi be released? He Tianshu looked at Zhang Xiaohua who didn't understand and asked, do you know what it means to release inner strength? Zhang Xiaohua shook his head and said, I know. Why would I ask you? He Tianshu explained, I don't know the specifics, but I know that once all the inner strength is released outside the body, it will immediately dissipate. It will no longer be controlled by the person who released it. When a high-level inner strength cultivation method is practiced to the end, the inner strength in the body will be incomparably vigorous. Only then can the inner strength in the body be released to a certain range outside the body. If a fist is used, then it will be a fist aura. If a sword is used, then it will be a sword ray. Then, He Tianshu looked around carefully and said in a low voice, I don't know about the rest of the people in Ethereal Sect, including sect leader O. I only heard some rumors that the second elder of the sect who cultivates the 7 ethereal swords has just mastered the sword gleam. That is a legendary martial art in the Jianghu. Looking at Zhang Xiaohua's shocked expression, He Tianshu said, think about it. Such a martial art that consumes inner strength can be used in a sword art to defeat the enemy. But don't you think it's a bit of a waste to use it on Qigong? Moreover, when you cultivate to the point where you can release qi, your martial arts will be superb. Your Qigong will also be profound. Why do you need to practice such a flashy floating technique? Then, He Tianshu came to a conclusion. Actually, the most important thing is that I have never heard of anyone in the Misty School or the Jianghu who can use Qigong to float in the air. Zhang Xiaohua still didn't give up and said, if there isn't, then why is it recorded in this ethereal steps? He Tianshu scratched his head and said, who knows? Maybe it's a kind of idea and not a real martial art. It's also a real martial art, but you can only practice this kind of Qigong when your inner strength is practiced to the extreme. However, these are not things we can care about. I may be qualified to practice the Qigong lifting technique in front, but you don't even have the qualifications to practice this. It's better to practice your spirit of the bull and build a solid foundation for your inner strength. Hearing He Tianshu say this, Zhang Xiaohua could only stop talking. When it came to martial arts, she was indeed a junior. She didn't have any qualifications to speak in front of He Tianshu. Then, He Tianshu said, the martial arts exhibition is about to begin. Zhang Xiaohua, have you really decided to participate? How are your preparations? When Zhang Xiaohua heard about the martial arts exhibition, she immediately became spirited and said excitedly, of course, I have already asked Manor Lord O to help me sign up. How can I not participate? Actually, I don't have much to prepare. I already know a set of fish techniques. Now, didn't you teach me the ethereal steps? I can use it in the martial arts exhibition. He Tianshu nodded and said, your sword technique is not suitable for the martial arts exhibition. You can only use your fish techniques with your bare hands. Then, He Tianshu seemed to have thought of something funny and said with a smile, but using a fist technique is also quite good. If you really use a weapon, it's not very suitable. Zhang Xiaohua was stunned and puzzled. She asked, not using a weapon. Captain He, what do you mean? He Tianshu laughed and said, "You will know when the time comes. It's not good to say it too early." Ha ha ha. Seeing that He Tianshu didn't explain clearly, Zhang Xiaohua didn't ask anymore. She thought to herself, isn't it just a martial arts competition? What's the big deal? At most, I will lose. Then, He Tianshu reminded Zhang Xiaohua to practice the ethereal steps more. Perhaps she would lose some face when the time came. Zhang Xiaohua did not understand what was going on. It was another baffling sentence. There weren't many days left. Although He Tianshu was constantly trying to comprehend the second level of the ethereal steps, in order to not disturb Zhang Xiaohua's preparation, he didn't impart anything to her. And Zhang Xiaohua stayed in the straw hut all day, cultivating the various martial arts she had learned. Early in the morning, Zhang Xiaohua sat cross-legged and silently chanted a mantra. She slowly absorbed the qi in her body into her dantian before slowly opening her eyes. After 10 days of bitter cultivation, Zhang Xiaohua faintly felt that the qi in her meridian seemed to have increased a little. However, she couldn't confirm it. However, diligence could make up for stupidity. She had been drawing qi into her body every day to temper her qi. Although the progress was slow, it was still improvement. Sooner or later, she would have some achievements. After finishing her cultivation, Zhang Xiaohua stood up. Just as she walked to the door of the straw hut, she heard a female voice calling her from outside. Zhang Xiaohua, are you here? It sounded very unfamiliar. It wasn't Qiu Tong's voice. Zhang Xiaohua hurriedly ran out and saw a girl standing far away. Upon closer inspection, it was Qiu Ju. Qiu Ju stood far away shyly and called out softly. When she saw Zhang Xiaohua come out, she quickly raised her hand and greeted her. Zhang Xiaohua lightly ran over and looked at Qiu Ju, who was blushing. She asked, "Elder sister Qiu Ju, is there anything you need from me?" Qiu Ju said softly, "Miss asked me to inform you that the martial arts exhibition will be held today. She wants you to pack up and go to the inner courtyard. In a while, the Misty School will send someone to pick you up." Zhang Xiaohua was pleasantly surprised. "Is that so, elder sister Qiu Ju? The competition is starting today. All right, please wait a moment. I'll go pack up." After speaking, she turned to go to the straw hut. But after taking a few steps, she awkwardly came back and said, "Elder sister Qiu Ju, I don't think there's anything to pack. Let's go now." Qiu Ju covered her mouth and smiled. "The martial arts exhibition will be held for a few days. Although you don't need to pack anything, you should still put the things in the straw hut into the small house first. There won't be anyone in the medicine field these few days." When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she couldn't help but blush. She chuckled and thanked Qiu Ju for the reminder. She quickly ran back to the straw hut and packed up everything. Only after bringing everything back to the small house did she follow Qiu Ju to the inner courtyard. It was the same small courtyard where they had set off to the south last time. A young man dressed in tight clothes was already impatiently waiting there. He kept pacing back and forth. When he saw Qiu Ju and Zhang Xiaohua walking over, he frowned deeply. Although Zhang Xiaohua was walking behind Qiu Ju, she had long seen the man's displeased expression. Zhang Xiaohua guessed that perhaps he had waited for too long and was feeling impatient. Thus, she hurriedly took a few steps forward and passed Qiu Ju. She cupped her hands and bowed to the man. "Senior Marshal Brother, I'm very sorry to have troubled you." The man's brows didn't loosen. He coldly looked up and down at Zhang Xiaohua and replied, "I'm very sorry. You're not from our Misty School. I can't accept this, Senior Marshal Brother. Please take it back. Are you the candidate for this year's Huanxi Mountain Villa to participate in the martial arts exhibition?" When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she was very embarrassed. Usually, she would call Nie Xiao'er and the others as senior martial brother. Seeing that this person was about the same age as them, she called him senior martial brother. She didn't expect to be rebuffed so quickly. It seemed that this misty school wasn't all amiable people. Hearing that person's question, Zhang Xiaohua hurriedly replied, "Yes, this one is participating in the martial arts exhibition." The corner of the man's mouth pulled down and he sneered. "I heard that Huanxi Mountain Villa hasn't done such a disappointing thing for many years. It's strange that someone doesn't know what's good for them today. However, looking at your age, there's no harm in it. Hee, just take it as an eye-opener." Zhang Xiaohua was puzzled. He wanted to ask what was going on, but the person in front of him looked like he was unapproachable. He did not want to get close to him, so he did not bother to ask. He would find out in a while anyway, so why bother asking now? Qiuju was at the side. Looking at that person's face, she felt unhappy. Unfortunately, she wasn't Qiu Tong and didn't have Oyan's support. Adding on to her weak personality, she didn't know how to criticize that person. She only looked at Zhang Xiaohua, who was half a head lower than her, and said, "Zhang Xiaohua, I'll send you here. Go with him. The Misty School will naturally have someone to arrange it for you." Zhang Xiaohua laughed and said, "Okay, big sister Qiuju. Thank you. When I win, I'll tell you first when I come back." Qiuju pursed her lips and smiled. "Okay, we'll wait for your good news. When you compete, be careful. If you can't win, just admit defeat and don't hurt your body." Zhang Xiaohua said, "I know. Big sister Qiuju, you can go back." The person next to her snorted and sneered, "Win. Just don't get beaten up badly. However, your sister warned you well. Why don't you ask her to embroider a white handkerchief for you with the words 'Hero, spare my life'? When you can't win, just throw the handkerchief away." When Qiuju heard this, her face turned red with anger. Zhang Xiaohua was also angry. She stared at that person and said, "What does it have to do with you when we're talking? Are the people of Huanxi Manor as cowardly as you say? Why don't I report this to my manor head? What do you think?" When that person heard her mention Oyan, he couldn't help but feel guilty and said, "This, Qiuju was a kind person." She quickly smoothed things over and said, "That's enough. Huanxi Manor and the Misty School are one. It's already late, so let's hurry up and leave." Seeing Qiuju like this, Zhang Xiaohua also smiled and said, "I know, big sister Qiuju." Then she said to that person, "Why aren't you leaving?" "I'm still waiting to be beaten up." That person didn't say anything else. He turned around and walked to the tree. He untied the reins tied to the tree and led 2 horses to Zhang Xiaohua, saying, "Then please get on the horses, great hero." Looking at the handsome horses in front of her, Zhang Xiaohua was a little dumbfounded. She hesitated and didn't go forward. That person smiled and said, "Great hero, please get on the horses." Zhang Xiaohua waved her hand and said, "Forget it. It's only a few steps away. We can just walk. There's no need to ride these horses." That person didn't give up and said, Then what? If we don't ride a horse, won't it show that our Misty School has no etiquette? Please get on the horses." Zhang Xiaohua scratched her head and muttered, But, I still don't know how to ride a horse." That person narrowed his eyes and said, "It's okay. These horses are the most docile. Just sit on it. There's no need to know how to ride a horse." Zhang Xiaohua didn't believe him and asked, "Really?" That person patted his chest and said, "Really? Let's go quickly. We won't make it if we're late." Only then did Zhang Xiaohua step forward and said, "Okay then. Don't lie to me." That person saw that Zhang Xiaohua didn't even know how to get on a horse. He walked to Zhang Xiaohua's side and handed the reins to Zhang Xiaohua. Then he put his hands under Zhang Xiaohua's armpits and used a bit of strength to lift Zhang Xiaohua onto the horse's back. Then he put his feet in the stirrups and hit the horses but with his hand and said, "No, how could I lie to you?" But in her heart she said, "It would be strange if I didn't lie to you." Then she was surprised, this youth's physique doesn't look thin or weak. How can he be so light? How strange. After the horse was hit by that person, it immediately let out a long neigh and raised its front hooves, almost throwing Zhang Xiaohua to the ground. It scared Zhang Xiaohua so much that she tightly held onto the reins, her small face somewhat pale. The horse's front hooves landed on the ground and it immediately exerted force with its back hooves, shooting out like an arrow. Seeing this, Qiu Ju's expression also changed and said, "How can you do this? Aren't you afraid that Zhang Xiaohua will get hurt?" That person laughed and said, "Zhang Xiaohua, haha, a little girl's name. It's okay, Qiu Ju, right? This horse is very docile. I didn't say anything wrong. It's just that it's a bit fast. Moreover, this old horse knows the way. It won't go anywhere else." After saying this, she also pulled the reins and swung the stirrups to get on the horse. With a tug of the reins and a clamp of her legs, she didn't use any strength. The horse spread its hooves and galloped away. Only Qiu Ju was left looking at the empty small courtyard. She stomped her small feet a few times and turned to enter the inner courtyard. Zhang Xiaohua fell into that person's trap and almost fell off the horse. Then, the horse galloped out of the small courtyard like lightning. At the beginning, Zhang Xiaohua tightly held on to the reins of the horse. Her body swayed left and right, almost falling off every time. It scared Zhang Xiaohua so much that her soul almost fell to the ground. When the horse left the small courtyard and went on a straight path, Zhang Xiaohua's body finally stabilized. After her body stabilized, Zhang Xiaohua's mind also calmed down. The person from the Misty School was right. The horse was very handsome and had a docile character. Riding on the horse, although it was fast, it was very stable. Not long after, Zhang Xiaohua got used to this speed. Her small buttock swayed left and right as she slowly adjusted her center of gravity. She liked the feeling of leaving everything behind. However, before she could enjoy the pleasure of galloping, in front of her was the side door of Huanxi Manor. Zhang Xiaohua suddenly thought that she didn't know how to stop the horse. What should she do? Seeing that the side door was getting closer and closer, and the mole on the guard's face could be seen clearly, Zhang Xiaohua's heart skipped a beat. She immediately shouted, "Get out of the way, I'm a newbie. Get out of the way, I'm a newbie." The guard of Huanxi Manor had already heard the sound of the horse's hooves and saw two unusually handsome horses galloping out of the small door of the inner courtyard. When the two horses came in, he had already checked and knew that they were brought in by the people from the Misty School. But if the horses wanted to go out, he still had to stop and check. After all, it was his duty. Moreover, he didn't know who was sitting on the horse in front of him. The tall horse only had half of its head exposed, so he couldn't see the face clearly. Who knew who it was? But when he saw that the horse was already in front of him and didn't stop, he was puzzled. Then he heard someone shout, "Get out of the way." The guard sneered and thought to himself, "Get out of the way. How can I get out of the way without checking? How can I let you go out?" And the last sentence, "I'm a newbie," made him even more puzzled. What did it mean? But when the horse rushed in front of him and didn't have the slightest intention of stopping, he instantly understood that this was what a newbie meant. The horse rushed straight over with a force of 1,000 pounds. Who would dare to stop it directly? Fortunately, the guard's martial arts were excellent. He immediately dodged and fell to the ground, barely dodging the horse. When the horse leaped over him, the guard took a peek. Wasn't the person riding on the horse the youth from the medicine field? What was going on? When the horse galloped past the side door, the guard jumped up from the ground like a carp and patted the dust off his body. Just as he was about to speak, he heard someone say, "Get out of the way, get out of the way, I have an urgent matter." The guard thought to himself, "Get out of the way again, could it be a newbie?" When he raised his head, he saw that the horse behind him had also galloped in front of him and didn't have the slightest intention of stopping. He had no choice but to roll over and fall to the ground. Chapter 168. Ha ha ha. The man from the Misty School saw the guard of the Huanxi Villa fall to the ground, but he did not stop and said, "Brother, sorry, I am in a hurry." With that, he took out a waist token from his arms, which was given to him when he entered the villa just now. He threw it on the ground, then shook the reins and chased after Zhang Xiaohua. When the man drove the horse through the side door, the guard did not immediately get up. He looked up and saw that there were no more galloping horses behind him. Then he stood up like a carp, patted the dust off his body, and walked over to pick up the waist token. He curled his lips and spat on the ground with a "bah" sound. He secretly cursed, "XXX, aren't you just a disciple of the Misty School? What's so great about you? You let me practice carp jumping twice. When I gain power one day, I will let you do push-ups every day." Unfortunately, the disciple of the Misty School had already gone far. How could he hear him? Perhaps, the guard said that because he was far away. Besides, Zhang Xiaohua shouted and walked. He actually rushed out of the side door of the Huanxi Villa. Zhang Xiaohua could not help but feel proud of his quick wit. Zhang Xiaohua did not know how to control the horse. Fortunately, the horse knew the way and did not need Zhang Xiaohua to worry. Seeing the horse following the road out of the Huanxi Villa and running towards the ethereal villa, Zhang Xiaohua's heart was relieved. There were many collisions on the road. Perhaps the horse was a good steed and avoided all of them. Perhaps the words of Zhang Xiaohua, "Get out of the way, I am a novice," played a role and gave others a hint. In short, they all safely avoided. When the horse ran to the straight road in front of the Misty Mountain Villa, Zhang Xiaohua's heart was finally at ease. The shouting along the way made him feel that his throat was dry. However, before Zhang Xiaohua felt relieved, the horse had already run to the front of the archway of the ethereal mountain villa. There were some guards in front of the archway. Seeing that the horse was in front of them, Zhang Xiaohua saw that the horse had no intention of stopping. She had no choice but to raise her voice again and shouted, "Get out of the way, I'm a novice." When the guards saw the horse in front of them, they didn't panic and didn't dodge. Zhang Xiaohua became more anxious and shouted even louder, "Get out of the way, I'm a novice, get out of the way, I'm a novice." When the guards heard this, they had strange expressions on their faces, but they still stood straight. When the horse got close enough, one of them let out a sound that sounded like whoosh. The horse's galloping body immediately stopped and its four hooves steadily stopped in front of the guards. Zhang Xiaohua, who was on the horse's back, was miserable. She thought that her shout had reached the ears of the guards. Presumably, they would dodge and her horse would rush into the archway like before. But who expected that the horse would suddenly stop? She had to admit that the horse was really handsome. Zhang Xiaohua was caught off guard. She immediately turned over from the horse's back and flew into the air like a cloud, rushing to the archway in front of her. The guard in front of her was also surprised and said, "She's really a novice." She immediately tapped the tip of her foot and leaped up. Using her qinggong, she flew in the direction of Zhang Xiaohua, preparing to catch Zhang Xiaohua's body from below. But just as she was about to catch Zhang Xiaohua, something strange happened. When Zhang Xiaohua flew off the horse's back, her hand was still firmly holding onto the reins. When her body flew into the air, the reins reached the end and immediately stopped her flying momentum. Therefore, Zhang Xiaohua stopped flying forward and landed straight on the ground. In fact, when Zhang Xiaohua flew off from the horse's back, he immediately thought of using the footwork of the ethereal steps, or some other techniques, or a method to stabilize his body and land gracefully. But once she flew off the horse's back, she couldn't control her body. How could she have the time to use any techniques? That guard used his qinggong to wait for her at the place where Zhang Xiaohua flew out. Moreover, the reins of the horse had changed the direction of Zhang Xiaohua. By the time the guard saw her, she had already used up all her strength and couldn't move anymore. She could only watch helplessly as Zhang Xiaohua fell straight on the ground with a pa sound, raising a cloud of dust. That guard couldn't help but grit his teeth. Using his hands to cover his eyes, he secretly said, "How tragic." But it was unknown if he was talking about himself or Zhang Xiaohua. In the history of the Misty School, such a thing had never happened before. It was really unprecedented and would never happen again. Luckily, Zhang Xiaohua's main force had been dissipated by the reins of the horse. He fell from such a high place only because he was dizzy and didn't know how to deal with it. Otherwise, at such a height, even a little boy might not be able to handle it. Therefore, by the time the guard ran over, he had already stood up. That guard saw Zhang Xiaohua standing up and asked, "Are you all right?" Zhang Xiaohua patted the dust on her body and said, "Oh, I'm fine. Just my clothes are dirty." When that guard heard, he smiled and asked again, "Who are you? Why are you riding our Misty School's horse?" Before Zhang Xiaohua could answer, the sound of hurried horse hooves could be heard from behind. Zhang Xiaohua didn't raise her head and said in a bad mood, "Ask that guy behind me." Sure enough, when the person from Misty School came closer and whispered into the guard's ear, that guard also had a strange smile on his face. He patted Zhang Xiaohua's shoulder and praised, "Good, you're brave." Zhang Xiaohua didn't understand, but looking at the face of that person from Misty School, she said fiercely, "How dare you trick me?" That person spread out his hands and said with an innocent face, "No, I'm just telling the truth. Horses are very gentle." Zhang Xiaohua gritted her teeth and said, "Then why did you hit the horse's butt?" That person shrugged and said, "Brother, your sister Qiuju already said that it was getting late. Didn't I also want you to hurry to our Misty School? I also made a mistake out of kindness." Zhang Xiaohua angrily said, "Is your surname Zhang?" That person was stunned and said, "My surname is Jiang, not Zhang." Zhang Xiaohua said with a straight face, "Since your surname isn't Zhang, then don't call me brother. When your surname is Zhang, then we'll talk about it." After saying this, she turned around and walked past the decorated archway with her head held high. The man from the ethereal sect was stunned. Looking at Zhang Xiaohua's short back, he chuckled in annoyance. He turned around to lead two horses and followed after him. Poor Zhang Xiaohua. She hadn't even participated in the martial arts exhibition and had already suffered such a loss. It really wasn't a good omen. Who knew what the future martial arts exhibition would be like? After turning around the decorated archway, they were faced with a large and empty plaza. Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but be stunned and stopped in her tracks. Seeing Zhang Xiaohua stop in her tracks, Mr. Jiang was also bewildered. However, he didn't stop walking. He walked past Zhang Xiaohua and continued to lead his horse forward. Just as he walked past one shoulder, he heard Zhang Xiaohua shout, "Ee." Strange. Mr. Jiang couldn't help but turn his head and ask, "What's wrong? What's strange about it?" Zhang Xiaohua glared at him in a bad mood and said, "Did I talk to you? Why do you like to talk to people so much? Why is this plaza so deserted? It doesn't look like there's going to be a meeting." Mr. Jiang rolled his eyes and said, "What did you think it should look like?" Zhang Xiaohua said in high spirits, I thought that this plaza would at least have a stage the height of 2 people. There would be countless disciples watching from below, and there would be disciples competing on the stage. Mr. Jiang laughed out loud and said, You're talking about the stage in your hometown, right? Our Misty School doesn't have one like that. Zhang Xiaohua was stunned. He thought to himself, That's right, I was talking about the stage where I watched the show in Lu's Hen. She couldn't help but blush as she said timidly, Then what does the martial arts exhibition look like? Mr. Jiang sneered and said, What the martial arts exhibition looks like, you'll naturally know once you enter the Misty School's gates. If we were to set up a stage in the plaza outside our gates like you, our Misty School wouldn't be able to mingle in the Jianghu anymore. We would lose all face. After saying this, he ignored Zhang Xiaohua and walked straight to the side door. Zhang Xiaohua looked at Mr. Jiang's back for a while and could only quickly chase after him. After passing through the side door, Mr. Jiang handed the horse over to a professional before turning around to call for Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohua had an unhappy expression as she walked through the side door. But when she walked through the side door, she was immediately stunned by the scene in front of her. In the plaza in front of her, there were actually many small stages standing there. Zhang Xiaohua had a puzzled expression and turned to ask Mr. Jiang, Didn't you say that there was no stage? Mr. Jiang had an innocent expression and said, I only said that our Misty School doesn't have a stage, but I didn't say that there were so many stages. Look, there's more than one in front of you. Zhang Xiaohua gritted her teeth and didn't say anything else. The plaza in front of her was very large. There were many small stages that were the height of 2 people set up in an orderly manner. It was smaller than the stages that they usually watched during the New Year in Lu Town. There was not a single person on the stages. There were quite a lot of people in the plaza, but they didn't gather together to watch the show. Instead, some people hurried away while others gathered together and gestured about something. But the entire plaza didn't look like it was in a mess, and it wasn't noisy either. It looked like everything was in order. However, Zhang Xiaohua looked at the scene in front of her and felt that it was a little awkward. But she couldn't put her finger on it. Seeing Zhang Xiaohua acting like a country bumpkin entering the city, Mr. Jiang was very disdainful. He distanced himself from Zhang Xiaohua and acted as if he didn't know him. But after waiting for a while, he saw that Zhang Xiaohua was still ignoring him. He couldn't help but feel a little angry and went forward to say, Zhang Xiaohua, why aren't you leaving? What are you doing here? Let people see you, a wooden chicken. Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohua was stunned and said in surprise, Isn't the martial arts exhibition right here? Where are we going? Mr. Jiang sneered and said, Who told you that the martial arts exhibition is here? Did I say that? Let's go. I'll send you there quickly. I still have my own things to do. I really don't know what you're thinking. You want me to go to the villa to pick you up? You can come by yourself. Zhang Xiaohua suddenly understood. She immediately said, If you have something to do, then hurry up and do it. I'll go by myself. Mr. Jiang hurriedly waved his hand and said, Don't get me into trouble. Look at you. You won't give up until you cause trouble. I'd better send you there personally. Seeing that the other party didn't trust her, there was nothing she could say. Zhang Xiaohua could only obediently follow behind Mr. Jiang and walk into the depths of the Misty Mountain Villa. This was Zhang Xiaohua's 3rd time entering the Misty School. The scene was very different from the previous 2 times. Along the way, as long as there was a large square, there would be many small arenas. Zhang Xiaohua carefully counted. Just the ones that she saw, there were dozens of them. She couldn't help but feel puzzled. What was the use of so many arenas? Were they all used for martial arts competitions? But looking at Mr. Jiang's expression, Zhang Xiaohua didn't want to be a curious child. She didn't know how big the Misty Mountain Villa was. Mr. Jiang had already led Zhang Xiaohua for a long time, but they still hadn't reached the place. The more they walked, the more confused Zhang Xiaohua became. Wasn't it just participating in the martial arts exhibition? Why did they have to walk to the innermost part? Weren't there many arenas in the square outside? Oh, that's not right. They were arenas. After passing through several winding corridors and small courtyards, they finally arrived at a large gate with a high wall. The red lacquered gate was tightly shut and was much larger than the gates of the other small courtyards. The wall was also very high and stretched very far, as if it was an independent place. Mr. Jiang walked forward and used all his strength to knock on the door knocker. Immediately, the door creaked open and a head poked out. Seeing that it was Mr. Jiang, he couldn't help but ask, "Why did you arrive so late? The martial arts exhibition is about to begin." Mr. Jiang immediately smiled apologetically and said, "Steward Su, the brat from the Huanxi Mountain Villa, took his time. I also hurried over." That person looked at Zhang Xiaohua behind Mr. Jiang and said with dissatisfaction, "You clearly know that Boss O comes here first every year. Why didn't you come earlier? All right, hurry up and come in." Mr. Jiang turned around and pulled Zhang Xiaohua's sleeve, saying in a low voice, "All right, this is the place. Zhang Xiaohua, this is our Misty School's young Eagle Hall Steward Su. Follow him in." After he finished speaking, he cupped his hands towards Steward Su and hurriedly turned around and left, as if he didn't want to stay for even a second longer. Zhang Xiaohua looked strangely at Mr. Jiang's back as he left. She couldn't help but say with envy, "This guy's character is terrible, but his qigong is still very authentic." Steward Su was already unhappy when he saw Zhang Xiaohua's foolish look. He frowned and said, "Young man, are you going to participate in the martial arts exhibition? Why aren't you coming in?" Only then did Zhang Xiaohua return to her senses. She hurriedly cupped her hands and entered the courtyard through the red lacquered gate. Zhang Xiaohua didn't enter the courtyard, but once she did, she was even more surprised. What was going on here? This was a plaza that was more than 3 times larger than the plaza behind the Misty School's decorated archway. There were also countless small arenas set up in the plaza. However, in the middle of the plaza, there was a square arena that was even larger than Lu Xun's stage during the New Year. There were already a few people standing on it. Zhang Xiaohua's eyes were sharp and she had already noticed that sect leader O Peng was among them. Actually, this wasn't the main reason why Zhang Xiaohua was surprised. What she was surprised about was that the plaza was filled with people. These people all had tender smiles on their faces and their hair had yet to fade. Most of them were even shorter than Zhang Xiaohua and looked to be in their teens. What was going on here? Just as Zhang Xiaohua was surprised, she suddenly saw 2 familiar faces at the back of the crowd. These 2 people's faces were alternating between green and red, and their expressions were very awkward. Who else could it be but Sheng Wanyun and Yu Dai of the Lotus Flower Escort Agency? Although the 2 people were standing at the back, their height was incompatible with the surrounding youths. They really stood out from the crowd. Moreover, although the youths' expressions were childish, they stood upright and looked like they were well trained. Although everyone was looking forward, there were still some people who would secretly glance back at these 2 strange outsiders. With so many people looking at them, the 2 people's hearts grew cold and they felt uncomfortable standing to the left and right. Just as the 2 people's hearts were filled with regret, they suddenly saw the door open and a familiar person came in. They were overjoyed and wanted to wave and call out, but when they saw Zhang Xiaohua's figure, which was similar to the youth beside her, they raised their hands but didn't call out. Zhang Xiaohua was also overjoyed when she saw a familiar face. When Steward Su saw this, he naturally knew that the 3 people were familiar with each other. He nodded and pointed to the two people, then hurriedly went to other places. When Zhang Xiaohua saw that the steward had gone far away, she ran to Sheng Wanyun and Yudai's side and cupped her hands in greeting. She couldn't wait to ask, "Brother De, what's going on?" Yudai opened her mouth and was about to speak when a soft and deep voice sounded from the stage. "Now, I announce the official start of the Misty School's martial arts exhibition. Next, let's invite our sect leader O to speak." Thus, a wave of orderly applause sounded. The eyes of the group of 10-year-old youths in the square shone with reverence as they stared straight at the tall stage. No, it was O Peng who was slowly standing up on the stage. O Peng stood in the middle of the stage and pressed his hands in the air. The applause under the stage immediately stopped, as if it had been rehearsed for a long time. O Peng nodded in satisfaction and then began to speak. O Peng's voice wasn't loud, but even though Zhang Xiaohua was standing far away on the other side of the square, she could still hear him very clearly. She heard O Peng speak, "Disciples of Kitty Hawk Hall, in this season of spring, when winter passes and spring comes, when all living things come back to life, when spring warms and flowers bloom, when the sun is bright and beautiful, we welcome the annual martial arts exhibition. Here, I have a few words to say to all of you. I have to say these words every year, and I have to mention them every year. Don't be annoyed. This is the hope and care that we, the older generation, have for you. You are the rising sun, and this era belongs to you. If you are rich, misty wealth will be misty wealth. If you are strong, misty strength will be misty strength. We, the older generation, have watched you grow up. You are the hope of Misty School. Today, I am standing here to speak to you. A few years later, I will be one of you, standing here to speak to your juniors. Misty is the Misty that is passed down from generation to generation. As long as you can stand out, we are not afraid of dying on the beach." Sect leader O's speech actually lasted for half the time it took to eat a meal, and he didn't stop at all. His earnest words reverberated in the air above the square. The faces of all the disciples were flushed red, and their small fists were tightly clenched. It was as if they had been encouraged to see the beautiful hope that O Peng described. Only Zhang Xiaohua and the others could hear the reverberating sound. They couldn't help but be shocked. This O Peng's internal energy was too profound. Zhang Xiaohua even thought that if there were beams in the square, wouldn't the sound echo for 3 days?